This is saying this one needs a primary key, because if you go into urls.py, the forum create demands a parameter, and so we're feeding it. But you can also feed that in a reverse. And you do it with this funky format. I wish that was by position, but no, it's not. You have this args keyword, and it's sending in a list of variables, and the variable is the primary key, which is the number, which is this 3. So we're redirecting to forum/forum/3, and that's where the 3 comes from. Okay? Okay, so the only thing to look at next is what happens when I hit the delete button. So let's take a look at the detail page. So remember that we cannot delete in a get, but we have to delete in a post. Okay? So in here, this is the trash can. The trash can's not going to do the deleting. The trash can is going to link to forums comment delete with comment ID. And so there's this number 3, but each of these comments has a comment ID. And so let's just inspect. This is, you can see in the bottom, it's comment 7. This one is comment 4. And so that is the comment ID, because we're looping in this code, we are looping through for comment in comments, so each comment has the primary key. So with all that, I am just going to click on it, and of course we're going to have a verification page that turns the get into a post in a sense. I mean, it's just a page. And so we've gone to comment delete view. So forums comment 7 delete. And if you look at the urls.py, forums comment 7 delete, right? And we give it a name, and we're going to route through to comment delete view. So if we take a look at our comment delete view, well, what's pretty cool is that we can mostly use owner delete view, because by now we know it, the object. We know that we're in the comment model. The template we're going to work with is comment delete, which is pretty straightforward. Okay. So it's going to go find, and so you'll notice we don't have a get in here, we don't have a post in here. And that's because we're inheriting all that from owner delete view, the owner delete view. Now, the only thing we're overriding is the get of the success URL, because the success URL, when we're all done, we want to go back to the forum, not 7, but 3. See how we're going to go back to forum 3, and it looks like that just went away. And so the success URL actually needs to be computed based on the current forum. And so we are overriding the get success URL, which is part, not exactly of owner delete view, but the models, the generic delete view. We are returning a string. And if you go and you read self.object.forum, self.object points to the current comment. So if we're in the middle of comment 4 delete, while we're running in this view, self.object is the comment, right? That's number 4, comment number 4. But comment number 4 dot forum is the primary key of the forum that this object belonged to. By the time we're here getting the success URL, it's actually been deleted. But we still have an in-memory copy of it, so we're going to go to the forum's no. I do not intend. Where was I? Yeah. I was dragging it by mistake, trying to highlight it, right? So it's been deleted, but we have it sitting here in the memory, and so we can get its former primary key. We can get the forum's primary key. Object doesn't exist in the database anymore, but the memory copy does, and so we know what that number is. So then we go to this fancy reverse again with a parameter, and so that's how we get back. Let's see what happens in the cancel. Cancel. Oh, so it's the cancel, right. So the cancel does this. The cancel generates the URL forum detail with a comment, which is the current object, and then a foreign key into forum and the primary key of the forum. So comment forum ID is what generates this URL. And there is that URL. It goes back to the forum detail page. So if I go cancel, it goes back to the right page. And that's because comment, you're walking the foreign key in this particular situation. So I think that we pretty much have covered let me just check the views. Yeah, we covered pretty much everything that's unique in this particular bit of code. And again, the new part here is to have a connector model and then have a many-to-many field. The rest of this is very much similar to many of the other things that we have talked about. So I hope this has been helpful to you, and now you can start playing with many-to-many kinds of connections. Cheers.
Welcome to our lecture about jQuery and the document object model. So we've already been talking about some vanilla JavaScript where you have a script tag and you do document.write, and we've already seen how that can update a web page that in the process of being downloaded. Now with jQuery, well, that's been around for a long time, since 1995 when JavaScript was first created. But ultimately, we are starting to see more and more of the interactivity of our application being done in the browser. And so we're writing more and more code in JavaScript. Our classic request response cycle, we do a click, it goes in through urls.py, picks a view, maybe talks to the database, pulls a form in, and out comes some sort of HTML plus JavaScript comes back. And if you do a view source on a page, that's what you're seeing. And so the browser, when it receives that, it parses it and turns it into what's called the document object model. And that is a data structure that in a sense lives 1 pixel behind your screen. And then you see the results of the document object model. And so if you do a view source, you see the response. But if you do an inspect element, you see the document object model. And so what you see how the document object model can change. And the way the document object model can change is by you writing JavaScript code that does something to the document object model or reads the document object model. And so the JavaScript comes in as part of the response from the server, but then it starts to run. And then when it's running, in a sense, you're completely cut off from the rest of the server. You've got your response, but your JavaScript can still be doing work in the page. It can have events that trigger, it can modify the DOM, it can intercept clicks and run some JavaScript, etc. So like intercepting a click is like, that's an on click, which says run a little bit of JavaScript and then come back, right? And so we can even intercept a click, do something to it, and then stop the actual sending of the data to the server. So JavaScript is in a very powerful position in your browser. It's in your browser, and your page can be sitting there. And increasingly, we're starting to see folks build more and more of their application in JavaScript and less of their application in Django or in backend. And so what we're finding over time is that the JavaScript is kind of talking to the models directly, and we'll talk about that in the next lecture, right? The JavaScript talking to the models directly and then putting stuff up on the screen rather than going through the entire request response cycle to get a page back. And so this is hybrid application. So now what we're going to do is we're going to really talk and focus much more on this interaction between JavaScript and the document object model. So document object model is a concept that's been around for a very, very long time. When JavaScript was created in 1995, in order for it to have access to what was on the screen and change what was on the screen, which was its goal, we needed a way. And so they create this variable called document, and the document is always there, and then you call methods and change attributes, and then you get back elements, like a paragraph is an element, and then you can change the color of the paragraph, and you can do all kinds of things. You can even insert new paragraphs. And in 1995, as the browsers were saying, do I want to add this JavaScript, they actually already had document object models, but they weren't the same. And so the idea that, all the browsers would agree on one document object model. That just was not practical at that time. It caused for a lot of pain from 95 to 2005, 2006, and we'll talk about that. But the document object model has never been, every bit of it is not forced to be a standard. And so we have parts of it that we make be a standard. So in the first part of this, we're going to talk about not jQuery, but instead what the world kind of calls vanilla JavaScript. And that's sort of JavaScript that the browser gives us versus JavaScript that we can write if we have the jQuery library installed. So we're going to talk a little bit about vanilla JavaScript. So one of the choices they made back in the day was, in order not to have to look at the DOM directly, we would just say, look, bypass all the shape of the document object model, which was a hierarchical set of trees and tags. Say, look, we're going to put this ID field on a tag, and then we're going to give document.getElementID as a way to look up and get our hands on a tag and then do something to that tag without having to work our way down from the body tag to a UL tag to an LI tag to a paragraph tag to a form tag, and work your way down and through the tags. And so it's like a jump right into the DOM, get your hands on something and do it. And so the actual shape of the document object model tree was less important. And so here is a really simple bit of code. And so what we've got is document. Okay, so document is always a document. Document.getElementID, and that's this method that was added to the document object model. And then you can look for a particular tag that has an ID, a person on it. And so in our HTML itself, I've got this span tag with an ID, a person on it, and that is my handle to get my handle on that span tag. Okay, so I can do a console log of that. I can get my hands on, here is the whole span tag, document get element ID person, and then inner HTML actually pulls out this little bit of text. So I can put a console log out and I can put it high there. And so you can see that in this JavaScript, I was able to pull out a little piece that was in the document object model. And then if you see, I can also then change it. So I can get my hands on the document object model, inner HTML, and I can put that on the left-hand side of an assignment statement, and then I can change it. And so this is what it looks like when you are console logging that get element ID by person, or get element ID of the person tag, the one that has ID equals person on it. And so you'll see in your console log that it's an object with lots of attributes and lots of methods. And this is, again, this is just one little corner of the document object model and all of the things that we can do to that document object model bit. So like I said, you can change the document object model by putting it on the left side of an assignment statement. So what we have here is a real tiny bit of JavaScript, and the pattern I'm using now is I'm using the on-click attribute in a tag. And so this is a way for me to make a anchor tag that you can click on and have it so that it actually just runs some JavaScript. So it's not really going to send it to the server. The return false in both of these says, don't actually, I've intercepted your click, and I'm going to handle your click, and I'm not going to let it go to the server. I'm going to do something, and I, as this piece of JavaScript, have decided that I've satisfied whatever the user wanted to happen on this click. But that's what return false does. But before that, I'm going to sort of go grab the document, get element by ID by stuff. Well, that's this bit right here. And then inner HTML, which is this text, and I'm going to rewrite this and put the word back here in there. So if you click on back, it's going to look like this because this got overwritten and it's now back. And similarly, if I click on forth, then it's going to go find this and set the inner HTML and rewrite it again. So in a sense, the pixels of the browser that you're seeing, are fungible, they're modifiable, they're changeable by the JavaScript. The JavaScript can change what you see. And so it's a very powerful position to be in. The whole page is parsed and read, right? The whole page is parsed and read, and then it shows you the page, and then you have registered a couple of event handlers. When this is clicked, let me run some code. And in that code, I'm going to do something to the screen you're watching, and then I'm going to say, you know what, I don't even want you to click on that href. I don't want you to go anywhere. I've handled it, etc. And so that sort of shows you the sort of read-write aspect of getting to and from the document object model from vanilla JavaScript. So here is a even more sophisticated little example. And in this example, you're going to see how you can actually modify and extend the document object model and add whole areas to the document object model that was not there before. So if we take a look at this code, and you can go ahead and run this on DJ Free. I've got a little link here, more, and I'm going to call this add function and return false. That's just so I stay on this page. And then I have an unnumbered list, and that's going to produce this first item. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start some JavaScript. I'm going to have a variable, global variable called counter. And so I just do this. This is a debug. And function add, that just sort of defines a function. And I'm going to call that later when I click on it. So when this page all is complete, it only shows first item. Now, so that's what's there. There we go. So first item is there, and then I click on more. So when I click on more, it runs this onClick, which calls the add function. And what it does is it says document create element. And so what that does is that creates an li tag, /li, an empty one, and it's not in the document right now. It's not on the screen. It's just like in a variable. So I've made an HTML tag that's an li tag. And then I can do things like set its class name, which is class equals, if I want. And then I can set its inner HTML to be the counter is counter. And then I'm going to add 1 to counter, so it starts out at 1. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab document get element ID the list, which is going to grab me this tag. And then I'm going to append a new child tag, which means I'm going to insert this little li tag that I just made right at the end of that, right before the end of that UL tag. And so when that code runs, the little counter equals 1 line shows up. And then I can click it again, and counter equals 2 shows up. And there's nothing going on with the server at this point in time. I am simply changing what the browser sees by changing the document object model in JavaScript. And so there are some places that you would use something this for a purpose. I'm just showing you how the document object model can be modified by what you want to do in JavaScript. And you can make new tags and stick them in. It's not just changing a bit of text, but you can put whole new chunks of tags. And frameworks like React and other ones, that's what they're doing. They're actually completely changing and messing with the tags. So up next, we're going to talk about jQuery and how jQuery has made this act of messing with the document object model a lot easier. So now we're going to take a brief look at jQuery. And so jQuery basically solved the problem in 2005 that the document object models weren't all that portable. Because in 1995 they wanted the browsers to adopt JavaScript, but they didn't want to make as a prerequisite standardizing the document object model, which is really the shape of how the tags are all put together. And so in the early 2000s, as we started using JavaScript more and more seriously, we would write so much if-then-else code for one browser or the other browser that all that got sort of wrapped up into a couple of different JavaScript libraries. And out of that many JavaScript libraries, jQuery kind of emerged as the best one and the one that we tended to use a lot most. And so instead of just like calling the document object model directly, we'd call a jQuery function. And then jQuery would call the document object model. But if one browser did it a little differently, jQuery had those if-then-elses, so we didn't have to each of us keep track of the different browsers and how the different browsers did various things. And this was a great improvement because we could just start writing really fun interactive applications, and we didn't have to become experts in the browsers. We just would use jQuery. It was pretty cool. So jQuery was built by a fellow named John Resig. He just did it for himself because we were all kind of trying to solve the portability problems that we had as we would move from one browser to another browser. And really it solves two problems, and that is how to select and manipulate document object model elements, find them, select them, and manipulate them, and then how to register events. Now we've seen events. OnClick is a good example of an event. And it was released in 2006, and it was super, super duper successful. It had a very quick update. And literally we're sitting here at least 15 years later and people still use it. There are very, very few things in technology that people like. Now we'll talk about at the end how the world is kind of catching up to jQuery, and there's sort of this movement to make it obsolete by making the browsers better, which I'm all for. If the browsers become better than jQuery, we all will benefit. So that lack of willingness to standardize the browsers in '95 led to the need to make jQuery in 2005, and then for the past 15 years the browsers have been grudgingly kind of lining themselves up so that we didn't really need to use jQuery, which is totally cool. And John would probably agree, and he would say, well, you know, now that they got it figured out, my library is not needed. I'm totally happy because now I can write code without having to worry about portability. So I'm not going to tell you a ton about jQuery. I'm not going to give you an exhaustive list of things. I'm going to show you a couple of samples of the kinds of things you can do with jQuery. jQuery has great documentation, whether it's jQuery.com or the Stack Overflow. You just say, how do I make a button disappear in jQuery? And you have to kind of say, how do I make a button disappear in vanilla JavaScript? Or how do I make a button disappear in jQuery? And you will find all kinds of wonderful things. And I really like the jQuery.com site because, I mean, it has a little bit of code, 8 to 10 lines that are pretty much what you want, and then you can add a couple lines and you're good. So I really have enjoyed using jQuery in particular because it's a very expressive language. It's easy to remember how to do things. It looks weird at the beginning, and I'll kind of talk about that a little bit. But we're just going to kind of get you the starting point because there is a ton to know about jQuery. So here is a bit of jQuery, probably the simplest jQuery that you can make. And so the first thing, of course, is you've got to include the jQuery library. jQuery is a bunch of functions actually wrapped up in one big function named $. And so you've got to load this. This you load. You can either load it in the head or you can load it at the end of the body. And if you load it at the end of the body, that's kind of best practice. I'm showing that best practice here. A lot of people load it in the head area, but you would like to pull your JavaScript loads down as low as possible so that it doesn't have to load so much stuff before it starts showing a page. But that's neither here nor there. I've got it down here. You certainly have to load it before you start calling it. So the interesting thing about jQuery, and this goes back to JavaScript, and if you remember, variables and functions in JavaScript can start with a $. That comes from Perl, and that comes from PHP, and comes from the Bash shell scripting language. And so when JavaScript first came out, in order to appeal to those people from those languages, it made $sign possible. But there were so many people come from Java and C and other languages like that that they thought that Java is cool and C is cool and PHP is not cool. And so any language that used $, Perl's not cool, any language that used $, in its variables was seen as like not very cool or not very classy. And but $sign remained a completely legitimate letter or character, and you could start a function name or a variable. And so John Resig, when he was figuring out, he could have named his function JQ, or he could have named it J, or he could have named it uppercase J, but he didn't. He named the function that sort of captures almost all of the functionality. He named it $sign. $sign is not part of the JavaScript language per se. It is a function named $sign. That's a function call. $document A lot of people look at jQuery and think that that's how JavaScript works, that somehow dollar is like language syntax. It's not. He wrote somewhere deep in there, function, $, parenthesis, curly brace, yada, yada, right? So $, is not special, it's just a character. It's like he called his function X, but he didn't. He called it $. So every time you see $, in jQuery, you'll know that that's not because it's a special character, but it does begin to look to us like magic jQuery, that is part of the language rather than whatever because of this use of $. Super clever. A couple other things back in the early 2000s were using the $, too, and there was a fight over who got to call themselves $. That's a long story. But those libraries aren't really too popular anymore, so it doesn't much matter. Okay, so one of the things that you need to do is set up a bunch of things once the page load is completed. And what we mean by page load completed is you've got your HTML downloaded, you've got your JavaScript files downloaded, you've got your images downloaded, and the page is kind of ready to be shown. And so if you think about that parse response part, when the response is fully parsed and all the other files are all ready, then you can say, you know what, now that I know the document object model is complete, I'm going to mess with the document object model. And there is a thing called body onload that's an event that you can do, but each browser triggered body onload differently. And so what jQuery basically said was, I will make it so that you can cause code to run that runs after the document is ready. And this is the syntax. Now, I'm going to go over this in some detail because it is kind of tricky. Okay? So, $document retrieves a jQuery wrapped version of the document, and then it has a member function called ready. And that ready takes one parameter, and this is the end of the function with the parenthesis. So ready, and there is one parameter. So it's like ready X. It has one parameter. But here's what's cool about JavaScript. Remember that a JavaScript object-oriented pattern is first-class functions. So that means that you can actually pass source code in as a parameter on a function call. And so everything from function to close curly brace is the first parameter, because what we're saying to jQuery, and this is where first-class functions are so cool, we're saying, hey, jQuery, here's some code. Just grab it, keep it, hold on to it for a bit, and when the document is finished loading, run my code. So you're in effect creating an event for later and giving your code to be run when the event happens. And the event that's going to happen is document ready triggers. And so all we're doing in this function, the other thing to just quickly notice is it's an anonymous function in that it doesn't have a name. It doesn't really need to have a name because it's code. It's just stored in a variable. This code is going to be in a variable deep inside jQuery somewhere. And so in that code we have two lines, and it's going to do an alert and a console log. And it will wait until everything, and this is a really simple page, so it's going to come out right away. But that syntax, and so when I was first learning jQuery, I would just paste this stuff in, and I'd be like, yeah, I think I got a syntax error, but I don't know. None of it made sense. It just looked like someone put punctuation in a blender and made a punctuation smoothie. That's what I used to think. But now, and that's why I'm stopping here, to make sure that you have as best chance as you can to understand this, right? So this curly brace is the end of the function, and the parenthesis is the end of the ready. And $document is a function call that has a return value that is itself an object that has a method of ready inside of it. And the ready method takes one parameter, which is code. It looks monstrous, but it makes perfect sense if you understand JavaScript object orientation. Okay. But the other lesson here is this notion that you can register for later. As this is being parsed, the code does not run. It runs sometime after the entire document is parsed and loaded and all of its sort of dependent pieces have been loaded as well. And then jQuery comes back and runs these 2 lines of code for you. So that's like event-driven coding. OnClick is the same way. OnClick basically says, you know, later, I've got this code ready. Later, when somebody clicks on this, come back and run that code. Okay. So 2 of the things that we do in jQuery is manipulate the document object model and manage events. And so this is a good example of an event. Okay. And so what we're doing here is, of course, we're including the jQuery and $window. And so if you think about, there's the $document. So if you think about a browser and you think about the actual document, there's a window, which is the amount that you can see, but there's a part of the document above the window and below the window. So the window, the document is the entire page that you might scroll up and down with, and the window is the part of the page that you're seeing right now. So it turns out if you resize your browser, the thing that's resizing is not the document. The document is the same size. It actually doesn't exactly have a size because it depends on the width of the window. But the window is the JavaScript equivalent. There's the document, which is all the text, and window is what you're seeing at this moment. So what we're saying here is $window, which is calling jQuery and passing the window variable into it, which is defined. Window is defined by the browser for us, and then that gives us back a jQuery object which has a resize method in it. And basically what we say, and the resize method ends here at the parenthesis, and then we have a function. And what the function is the code that's going to get called whenever the user resizes their browser. When the user grabs and resizes the browser, that means the window size changes and call me back. So this is how we build responsive websites, so that we can say, hey, if the window changes, I want to reorganize the thing or hide a thing or make it so that 2 things that are next to each other go below each other or something. So we often do want to get called back when windows get resized. And so in this case, we're not going to do anything. We're just going to log the fact that the new size of the window, and now we have $window.width, which is a method of the $window object, the jQuery's wrapping of the window object. Width, figuring out how wide the window is actually really tricky for browsers, because it turns out that windows sometimes have like scroll bars on their side, and sometimes they don't. And some browsers count the scroll bar as the width of the window, and some browsers don't count the scroll bar as it. And so there's all these non-portable things that are all cleaned up nicely by calling, hey, how big is the window? How tall is the window? Which is really the width of the window and the height of the window, the viewable part of the page that you're currently looking at. And so if you run this code and you resize it, you see the log just go, it goes back and forth really fast, because every time you resize or you resize and let go, then it calls this code. And again, you have asked jQuery to inform you by calling your code whenever a particular event happens. So registering events, one is the ready event, one is the window resize event, and so this is just sort of how that happens. Now there's on-click events. So in this one, we're going to play a little bit with more of the jQuery syntax to look things up, and a little bit more about how events work and how we hook events into the various parts of the document. So one of the things that we're going to do, so if you were to use this, go to this JQ03 thing, when you click toggle, this spinner comes on and off, and when you click red, this background becomes blue. So you can toggle it on and off. And so the first thing we do when we're going to use jQuery is we have to put handles on our code. And so we're going to take this paragraph right here, and we're going to put an ID tag on it so we can grab on it. That's how we're going to set the background. And the spinner is sitting here with a display none, style equals display none, and we put an ID of spinner on so we can grab it. And then we're going to put these 2 anchor tags, this toggle and this red tag, anchor tags, and you'll notice we didn't put an on-click. When we did this before we used jQuery, we used an on-click to accomplish this same kind of idea. And so this, in a sense, it's sort of the idea that this is HTML, it's read CSS with CSS, and it sort of immediately can be shown even before, right in here there'd be a load of the jQuery library, and the jQuery all sort of stuff all starts up. I took the loaded jQuery out right there. And the idea is that you have HTML and then your jQuery will augment that HTML. So we kind of have this below the line and above the line. We have a static HTML, and now we're going to do stuff to sort of get our hands into the DOM. And so the order is important because the DOM is being built, but there is no JavaScript in there. That DOM is built really fast, and then we can then add to it. So the first thing we're going to do, and most jQueries sort of start out with this, is you're going to do some setup, and you're going to do it on a document ready event. And you're going to have some code. So all of this is the code that fires on document ready. jQuery document ready takes care of all when that fires and makes sure that we get called. And so we're going to do two things. The first we're going to do is we're going to use this on, and we're going to go find the tog bit, which is this bit, which is toggle, and we're going to effectively hook an event in that's going to run this code, right? And then the next thing we do is we go and say, let's go grab the red thing and do an on click, and then call, when that gets clicked, call this code. So what we've done is we sort of preset it so that we have sort of snuck in and said, add an event here, and etc., right? And so if we look at what's going to happen on the toggle, when we click on toggle, it goes and grabs spinner, and toggle hide, show, hide, show, hide, show, and that's how the spinner comes and goes and comes and goes. So if we then look at what happens when we click on the red, we click on red, and then that is going to run, you click on red, and that's going to run this code right here. And that is going to go and find para, which is this paragraph tag, and go to change the CSS and change the background color to green. We're being ironic by making it green. So that changes the background color to green. So you see this thing of, we don't put so much JavaScript in line because that slows the loading of the page. What we do at the end, once the page is all loaded, then we sort of like hook in, add an event here, add an event there, and then when we as the user start clicking on things, things start to happen because then we're clicking and activating it. So it's just very much a jQuery pattern to get everything all set up in the document ready, and then have the page have its interactive aspects that use jQuery. So this is a little more sophisticated example that sort of mirrors what we did with the document object model. And so we're going to re-implement this thing where it starts out and says first item, and every time we click on more, it adds another list item to that. And we're just going to redo it. So we're going to have this anchor tag. Now you'll notice I'm not saying on click here. I'm going to show you how to do that in a more jQuery-like way. I'm just leaving it alone. But I am giving an ID so I can get my hands on it later. I am going to have an unsigned list with an ID of the list, and it's going to have a first item as it comes from the server before I do anything else. So again, you wouldn't see any of this stuff the first time it comes to the server. It would say more and first item, and that's it, nothing else. And then we include the jQuery library, of course, and now we're going to run. And this code is running, in a sense, as the browser is loading. It's not, well, yeah, it's going to register a bunch of events. So let's take a look at it. So I'm going to have a counter equals 1 global variable. I'm going to do a document ready, and that is going to pass in some function that says run all the code inside the document ready once the document is fully loaded, which is, sometimes after that very last line. When the document is ready, it runs another thing. And this happens to be go grab $, quote, $, the href says go grab whatever tag in the document has an ID of the href, and then that gets it, and then there's a method called on, and the on is the way to register interest in an event. So we're saying on click, and that's pretty much the same as putting on click in that anchor tag the way we did in the previous example. So we are registering, the page is displayed, and the first thing we do after the page is displayed is register our interest in click events. And then we have to say, oh, and wait a second. When the click event's going to happen, I want you to run some code for me. So now we have first-class functions, again, an anonymous function, right? And that's the code that's going to run when we click on more. So we have 3 lines of code that are going to run when we click on more. And when the page shows up, we see more, we see first item, and then once the page is ready, then it registers an on-click with the more. You could click on the more, it would do nothing until the on-click registration happened, which is like a blink of the eye after the page shows up, okay? It's not a static thing, it's something that the code actually does. Meaning, if you did something like had a syntax error on counter equals 1, this wouldn't register. It wouldn't register. But it does, and we have counter equals 1. So now let's walk through what happens when we click on more. We click on more, and more, jQuery has registered an event for us that says run this code. And so that's what it does. It jumps in and runs that code. Console log clicked. Counter plus plus, you know what that is. So then what we're going to do is we're going to go grab that unsigned list. That's this unsigned list. And then we're going to call on that jQuery element, we're going to call the append method, and we're just going to give it some text. We're going to say, here's an li tag, There's nothing special. This is just a string, and this is string concatenation. The plus is string concatenation. The counter is going to show up, so that's going to be 1. And we're just going to append it to the list, so out of this append, another list item shows up. And then we add the counter. And if you click on it again, it's going to run, and the second counter is going to show up. And if you click on the more again, the third counter, you can click on it as many times as you want, and it'll just keep adding things to it. So we're extending the document object model. We've changed the text of it. We changed the color of it. And so these are the kinds of things that you can do. And you'll, as you get used to jQuery, I think you'll really like, it'll take you a little while to get used to this first-class function syntax. Just come back to this lecture and watch it again, and then maybe after the 4th or 5th time, you're like, oh, I get it. It's a first-class function. The function keyword returns code. It's actually, the function is executable code. It's beautiful, and a lot. I could actually write this code in a way that would make it a lot clearer what's going on with a couple of variables and assignment statements. But JavaScript people just love this first-class function stuff, so they tend to write this nesting. And there's a function nested inside of a function. It's okay. After a while, it's very succinct, and it's very object-oriented, and it's very beautiful. But it doesn't look like Fortran, right? It doesn't look like Python, because it's like just object orientation layered on top of itself. But after a while, you really will, I think, appreciate the amazing elegance of jQuery and how it looks. That's why it looks and feels like it's actually part of JavaScript, not really a library. But it's not. It's just one really clever object named $. Just amazing to me. Now, in 2005, the browsers were kind of a mess. Their document object models were all different. When we would write JavaScript, the stuff would break, and they would release a new browser, and it would break. jQuery has been around, well, no, more than almost 15 years now. And it's been around so long that a lot of people did not know what life was like before jQuery, and they just include jQuery, and they just assume that they don't realize that include statement, or that script tag that's pulling jQuery in, is the thing that makes jQuery possible, and those $signs just wouldn't do anything if it wasn't for that script tag. But jQuery has become sort of normal. It's the new normal. And so what was interesting is that jQuery sort of showed up the browsers, and the browser folks were, and the JavaScript folks were like a little bit, I would say, offended is not the right word, because they used it too. They're like, that kind of showed that we could do better. There was room for improvement in how JavaScript, document object model, and browsers work together. We've been writing jQuery for 15 years. And slowly but surely, the browsers have been adding one feature at a time, kind of borrowing the useful things out of jQuery. And that doesn't, I don't think that John Resig would be mad. I think he would say, finally. And And in a way, what it means is that jQuery as a library has fewer and fewer if statements in it. Because now if all the browsers support a way to loop through all of the objects, like in this little example that I've got, go through and find all the objects with a class of box and then hide them, well, that's how you do that in jQuery, right? Dollar quote dot box quote dot parentheses dot hide. Well, if in old days this didn't exist, but in the new browsers there is a way to do that. Now, what you find, honestly, is you find that the vanilla JavaScript way to do stuff is often a little wordier than the jQuery stuff. And I don't quite know why they didn't just make fake jQuery, but ultimately the only thing that really matters here is like the dot box and all this other stuff. Box style display is none. They chose not to change the document object model and give it a whole new sort of layer on top of it. But in time, when we can all use what's called vanilla JavaScript, and when you're Googling, you can say, hey, how do you hide a button using jQuery? How do you hide a button using vanilla JavaScript? Or how do you hide a button without using jQuery? Because increasingly people are starting to just use vanilla JavaScript. And I think that's a really good trend. But for beginning programmers, I think jQuery is just a little more succinct, solves our problems a little more directly, and the browsers are still catching up. So I think we got another at least 5 years where jQuery is going to still be around and very, very popular. But in a sense, jQuery is more and more a convenience wrapper on top of really powerful functions that are present in all browsers, and it's only in very older browsers and legacy browsers that jQuery does any real work, and that's okay. And then we can mix the old and the new syntax, and then we find, you know what, I actually don't need jQuery anymore, and then you just use what's in the browser, and the browsers have had enough revisions so that the new features in the browsers all work, on and on and on and on. And so it's pretty cool. And so we'll get there. jQuery for 15 years has been something that we've depended on heavily, and it has influenced tremendously the evolution of the document object model in browser-based JavaScript.
Hello and welcome to another recording in Django for Everybody. Today we're going to go through some of the sample code in jQuery. First we're going to talk a little bit about how the document object model works. I'll open this in a new tab. So let me view page source so you can see this. So in this one, we're just going to play with the document object model. Let me make it a little bigger, real big. Just play with the document object model. And as I mentioned, all of these tags, HTML, P, all of them, they are in some kind of a hierarchical object inside of the browser. But because in the early days the browsers were so incompatible in terms of how they represented the parsed HTML, they created this concept called document get element by ID. It's a kind of a clunky, I think part of it, they made it as long as they could so they didn't run into any existing methods inside the document object. But the idea is that document get element by ID has been around forever, and it basically got you a handle on the element. And so that's all of this, including the attributes like ID equals person and the inner HTML, etc. And so this itself is an object. Let's go ahead and refresh. I'll make this a little bigger. Look at the developer console. So here we are. So let me clear this and I'll come back and hit refresh on this. I'm just looking at it temporarily. And so the first thing I'm going to do is do console.dir, which is just dumping returns an object that represents all this information. So let's take a look at it. I'll hit refresh. And you see that span tag right there, that span tag is the ID of person, has all kinds of information inside of it, right? And somewhere in here, I hope we'll find inner HTML right there. And so you can look around, you can use a dump of this stuff in your console sometimes to figure out what you can do with these things. And I'm going to play in this particular one with inner HTML. And the first thing I'm doing is I'm going to read the inner HTML. I'm going to pull the inner HTML attribute out of this. And the inner HTML attribute is just this chuck, right? But I'm going to store it in a variable. Now I'm just storing in a variable. I'm going to console log it, and that's all I'm going to do, right? And then I'm going to put an alert out with that thing. And then I'm going to change it. So you can put these on the left-hand side because the JavaScript can change the document object model in the browser, and it will say Joseph, right? So if you look at the view source, that's what I'm looking at right now. View source here, you see that it's in this span tag, it says Chuck. So now we've run it, and it came along, and I'll hit refresh again so you can watch. In the middle of that alert box, right here, the data is still Chuck, right? And so look at the document object model right there is Chuck. And then as soon as I let the code continue, by pressing OK, you will see that it's going to modify it, and it's going to say Joseph. Okay, now if you look, the source code that originally came from the server said Chuck in it, and now it says Joseph. Now you can, so this is not really the document object model. The HTML is the HTML. The document object model is what's inside the browser, in the browser's memory after the HTML has been parsed. And you've probably done this a million times already, but when you say inspect element, you are not looking at the source HTML, and it even looks quite different, right? This makes sense. It's like pretty and it's indented, and you see the document object model. And so this is the screen you're looking at, and this is the data behind your screen you're looking at, where it says ID person Joseph. But if I go back to the original thing, it never changed the source code. It says ID person Chuck. And so you can see how it can change the document object model. And so that's the first bit about this DOM O1.htm code. Okay, is that just you can change the document object model. So let's take a look at DOM O2. And so let's view the source of this one. View page source. So make a big. Oops, make it a little smaller. Okay, so in this one, what we're doing is we're adding an onClick method, and we've been talking about this for a while. And in the onClick, we're running JavaScript. So this is JavaScript, document get element by ID, stuff inner HTML equals back. Well, let's find where stuff is. Stuff is the span tag that has an ID of stuff. Happens to have stuff as its text as well. So it means that when we click on the back link, it's going to run onClick, its onClick method. That's the definition of the onClick method, event-driven programming. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the string to back inside that span tag, and then we're going to return false. And remember, return false basically says don't do the actual click. So usually hrefs, anchor tags, cause a click to happen. And similarly, if we send it to fourth, if we click the other one, it'll put the string to be fourth. And so let's do so this is saying stuff right now, which is exactly what came from the server, right? So the server sent this document, the HTML. So if I do an inspect element, you will see the part that when you inspect the element, you see the actual document object model, what the browser is actually showing you. So you'll notice that now I can modify based on user action in an onClick method. I can modify it. So I click on back, and you see that the document object model changed. And as soon as the document object model changed, the part that we're seeing, there was no interaction with the server here whatsoever. And so I can click forth, and you see the document object model change, back, forth, back, forth, back, forth, and you're watching the document object model changing. The source code never changes. That is long. At this point, that was 30 seconds ago. It retrieved it, and it built the first page. As a matter of fact, the fact that there was ever the word stuff in this span tag, that's just gone now. It's just not there. It's not remembered. We rewrote the document object model. The JavaScript code plays with the document object model, not the original response from the server. And so that's another little example of playing with the document object model, just to kind of emphasize how it is that, just to emphasize the fact that what we're watching on the screen is the document object model. And we're seeing the document object model on the screen. And the JavaScript can change it. And then if we do view page source, we are seeing what originally came from the server. Okay, and so this is the code that originally came from the server. And so we're going to do a couple things here. At the bottom, I'm going to have a global variable called counter equals 1. We'll just console log it, mostly because in case I want to debug what's in this UL tag, which got an ID of the list. And then I'm going to define a function, and we'll come back to that. I'm going to call that function when I click on the more string, right? And onClick says call the add function and then return false. And again, that's to suppress. Return false is to suppress the default behavior of the href, of the anchor tag, clicking on the text of the anchor tag. So I've got code that will run under more. And what the code does is adds to an element. And so, let me refresh this. View page source. Oh, I didn't want to be view page source. I want to inspect element. Okay, so now we have the inspect element. That source code is just there. I threw that up with some clever JavaScript. So here we go. So we got this item, we got this UL tag, right? And so this is the document object model. And right now, because we haven't done anything, it mimics what came from the server. And now I'm going to say more. And you see that I got a new thing in the document object model. So if I go li, and close those all down, more, right? And so the document object model is changing, but of course the stuff that came from the server is not changing. So let's take a look at how this is accomplished, okay? So every time we click the more button, it comes into this add function, and it's going to use the document object model to create a new li tag model. I can give it a class. And if you look at the document object model, you see that my new LIs have a class, a CSS class on them called list item for no particular purpose. Just you can do this stuff. It's not. And I set the inner HTML. Now at this point, this X contains an LI tag that is not connected to the document, but it's fully sort of, and I concatenate the counter, which is why it says 1, 2, 3, 4 as these things are put on. But then what I do is I say, let's inject this little X, this little tag that's living out in a variable, let's actually move it into the document. So what I do is I say, let's go grab the list, which is the UL, and append a child. Well, this LI tag is a child to the UL tag. And when I'm done with this append child, I'm going to have another child. It could be something other than an LI tag. I just happen to be making an LI tag. So lines 13, 14, and 15 here are making a new LI tag, and then line 16 connects that LI tag into the document object model at the appropriate place. So the next one is going to come, we're going to append a new child. So at the end of this, now we got first item, counter 1, counter 2, 3, 4. There are 5 children for the LI tag, and if I click it again, there will be a 6th child for the LI tag. And so there you go. And so that gives you a sense of how we mess with the document object model using normal vanilla JavaScript. And up next we'll take a look at some jQuery samples that really give us a better pattern for messing with the document object model. Thanks. Hope this has been helpful to you. Hello and welcome to another walkthrough for Django for Everybody. So in this walkthrough, we're going to play with some of the jQuery examples. Before this, we did the document object model way of doing things. And jQuery, of course, is a better way or a newer way of dealing with the document object model. And there's other ways as well, but jQuery has been something we've used for a long time. So let's take a look at the first one and take a look at the source code. And here is some code. Let me just view source. It happens to be showing you the source in case you don't know to view the source, but let's go ahead and view the page source here. Make it a little better. This is my little, that's my little magic to show the source. But basically, let's just take, this is showing how to do basic things in jQuery. And so if I hit refresh again, you'll see it hits an alert button. Can I make this bigger? Yeah, make it bigger. Okay, so here's a basic jQuery. So the first thing is jQuery is a software library, a bunch of functions, actually kind of one function named $, that has a bunch of methods to it. And we load it, so you have to load it. So you'll notice that I have to load this before I reference this $. So, but I'm also loading it kind of at the end of the document. There is a discussion about where you load this, and best practice tends to want to load it in the document and have a line above which there's static HTML, and then pull your JavaScript down to the bottom of the document as much as possible. But a lot of people don't do that, but I'm just trying to do it here. But this is about JavaScript. So the thing we talked about in lecture was how the $sign is just an object. It's not language syntax, it's just an object. And so we're calling the $sign a function, and the $sign function is being passed a parameter of the document. Document is the JavaScript variable document that represents the document object model. It's all the pixels and the things that are on the screen and the thing you see when you do view source. Now, the place we tend to start in jQuery is we use the document ready function. And so what this thing is, document ready, is a bit of code. And we go into first class functions here. Document ready says, please run this little function that I'm giving you when the document is ready, when the document loading has finished. So in a sense, when the whole document is finished and all the stuff has been parsed and all of the ancillary elements have been loaded, etc., then call my code. And we're using first class functions because we have an anonymous function that's got an alert and a console log, just so we can see when it happens. And so it's done. It's not very impressive. It's just, and when I hit refresh on this page, let me do a window developer console, so you can see this, so you can see that, clear that. If I hit refresh, it's going to wait until the page is fully loaded, and then it's going to run those 2 lines of code. Okay, the alert happens first, and then the console log happens second. Now remember that alert is a very aggressive way of doing debugging in that it actually stops the browser in its tracks. Console log just sort of prints something and keeps on going. And so there's nothing, when it's in the middle of that alert, the browser gets to do nothing else. It doesn't like run the next line. It's really stopping everything. And so document ready, call the $sign function, pass in document. It returns an object that has a function, a method called ready. And the ready function takes one parameter, and the parameter is some code to be run. So this is kind of what's called an asynchronous programming model, in that I am not running this function right now. I am telling jQuery to run the function later. The other thing to notice really quick is there is no function name here. And that's because we don't need to name it. We could put this in a named function and tell it to run function XYZ here. But instead, it's basically convention because of the awesomeness of first-class functions in jQuery, in JavaScript, to just put the code right there. And so it looks like syntax soup, but it's really not. Call a function, get an object back, call the ready method, pass in one parameter. Oops, don't do that. Pass in one parameter, which is source code, and then you have the end of the function, which is this parenthesis, and then this all here is in effect one line of JavaScript. Okay? So that's the first one. So now we take a look at the next one, and this one here. Let me window do a console. Turn on a console, web developer console. Okay, hide that. So when this page loads, there's another JavaScript constant called window. And so window is not the whole document. The document might be larger than a window, and if you have if your window, let me make it like this. So if your document is bigger than your window, you get a scroll bar. If your document is not bigger than your window, then you don't get a scroll bar. Okay, and so the window is the browser's concept of what you're seeing. not necessarily what's there. Inspect element is everything on the page. Now, it's including stuff that might not be viewable. Now, this one's so small, but you get it, the idea that DOM is always there. Window is what's here. So one of the things we like to do if you're building accessible responsive or accessible content sometimes, you want to check when this thing is resized. And so we say $, which is a function, the jQuery function, that returns a jQuery wrapped version of the window object, and we're going to call a method in that called resize. And what we're saying is this is another example of delayed execution. Say, please execute this code when the window is resized. Okay, so we're not executing the code right now. We are executing the resize function, but we're passing in data, and then jQuery is going to store that for later. And when jQuery detects that a resize has happened, it's going to call our code. Now, all this code does is print out the current $window width and $window height. Now, it turns out that in the old days, it was really difficult to figure out window width and window height, because width sometimes included the scroll bars, sometimes it didn't include scroll bars on different browsers and different versions. So jQuery is conveniently telling us what the width really is, so we can write code like to take 80% of the width, whatever it is we want. We can say 80% and we know it's going to work consistently across all browsers. That was part of what jQuery did, was it standardized things that were different across browsers. So now, let's resize the screen, right? Let's resize the screen. And every time the screen resizes, you can see that I am getting, my code is being called as a part of the method, right? So my code's being called. So this is called event-driven programming. We are not running our code right now. We are asking the browser to run the code for us when something happens. And so that's part of jacking into the jQuery's event system. Okay, so I hope you found this useful. Hello and welcome to another walkthrough for Django for Everybody. We're continuing our walkthrough through the jQuery. In this one, we're going to play a little bit with the onClick event, and it's very similar to this DOM one, but showing you how instead, let me open them both. So if we review this DOM one, and we do a view source, page source. So basically what we did is we had an anchor tag, right, in the DOM, we have back and forth, and we have an anchor tag and we put the onClick, and we're using what we call vanilla JavaScript. And so we had a onClick, and then we would play with document get element by ID. And I want to show you how we do this same thing in jQuery using a similar kind of a thing. So let's just play with it. We're going to have a spinner come and go, toggle the spinner, and then we're going to turn the background red. Okay, so we're going to do it with a little different style. So let's refresh it. Let's turn on our, make it bigger, make it smaller, and then view console. Okay, so let's take a look at view source. We got that one. Let's do view source on this one. View page source. Okay, so I sort of mentioned the fact that we tend to like getting our JavaScript toward the bottom of the page. So if you look at the top part of this page, lines 1 through 8, you see that there is no JavaScript in there, not even an onClick. And so the key is with jQuery is there's this pattern of like having relatively static HTML and CSS, and then at some point start doing your JavaScript and then enhancing the page. And so we're loading the jQuery library on line 9, and then on line 11 we have a document ready. Now I talked about this in a previous walkthrough. Document ready is using the $function, passing the document as a parameter, getting back an object, calling the ready method in the object, and then passing one parameter, which is code, to the ready method. But it shouldn't take you long to just grab this line of code and paste it in. Document ready function, parenthesis, curly brace. And then you also have to paste line 19 here, which is close curly brace, parenthesis. And then you just kind of ignore those two lines and realize what it is that I want to run at the moment the document's ready. So pretty quickly, the whole document ready thing just is a thing you do, and you cut and paste it from one file to the next, and it looks kind of like syntax salad, but it doesn't matter, because then ultimately the code that runs when the document is ready is the part that matters, and you just work on that. So let's take a look at what's going on here, and we're again hooking up two events. So first we're doing is we're going to go look up the tag that has tog, #tog, and that looks up the tag, this anchor tag that is got an ID of tog. And then what we're going to do is that wraps that element in jQuery and then calls the on, which is a method, and then we have a series of events, and we're asking for that click event, and we're saying when that click event happens, run this function. It's only a one-line function, right? It's only a one-line function that says $spinner toggle. So this onClick isn't connected in until this line of code runs, but then it's like an onClick got added to the anchor tag. And so the ready function delays till the page is loaded, and then within the ready function we're registering a click that's going to delay until the click happens, right? So the click hasn't happened yet. And the same thing is we're going to find the tag that has an ID of red, and we're going to, when that clicks, we're going to go find the ID of para, which is this tag right there, paragraph tag, has this text, where's the spinner in it, and we're going to change its background color to red. And so those are just two things. Now at the end of this page, really nothing has happened, but we have augmented the markup, right? And so we can take a look now, we can take a look at like this. We can inspect the element for a bit, and you'll notice it says event. So that means that there has been an event listener that's added to it. And so toggle spinner has an event listener, and red has an event listener. And so that's what these two lines of code did, is they basically registered an event listener for these two links. Now, ultimately, it's not that different than if we put an onClick in. The difference is this is the jQuery way of doing it, and that is leave the HTML alone, just generate HTML, putting ID tags and class tags and style tags and whatever, and then later augmenting it in the ready function, and then we can use that. And so it achieves the same thing, but this is sort of the jQuery way of achieving. So #spinner toggle, well, that changes this display none to display block and back and forth. And then the background color red is just a CSS variable. So let's go play with this a little bit. Okay, so let's look, where's the spinner? Let's find the spinner. Here's the spinner. So here's the thing. In this spinner, you'll notice it says display none. Where's the spinner? So here's where's the spinner, and there's an image tag, but it's hidden. Now this is a common thing. Spinners come and go. We use them to indicate to our users what's going on. And this one's there already, but it's not shown. Now when I toggle it, the toggle is actually going to read this, figure out what the current status is, and then change it, and then toggle will go back. So watch down here where it says display none as I toggle it, and watch the fact that the spinner's there. And so the display none was taken out, right? So now that spinner's there, and we see it because display none is not there. But if I toggle it again, it goes away and display none happens. So it's not just markup that we can change. We can change CSS, we can change just about anything. So I can turn this spinner on and off, and we're modifying the document object model, and we're seeing that live, the document object model modifications are being seen live, and we're seeing the results of the changes to the document object model as the spinner appears and disappears every time we click the spinner. Okay? And so if I look at this ID this paragraph tag, that's this whole thing, and if I turn the red on, you can watch as we are updating the document object model and changing the CSS. That will add a style tag, so watch. Boop. And so there we go. We added CSS, background color red, which of course took the whole paragraph to make it red, and away we go. And so I don't have a way to turn it off, but you could certainly rewrite this in a way that turned it off. And so this, this does no particularly interesting thing other than the fact it shows you how we sort of add ID tags and then connect events to those ID tags toward the end of the page rather than using on-click in the middle of the page. Okay, so I hope that you found this particular walkthrough helpful. Cheers. Hello and welcome to another Django for Everybody walkthrough. We're currently walking through the various jQuery ideas. So in this one, we're going to replicate the code we did in the document object model. Let me go back and open both of these. This one and this one, jQuery O4, and so what we were doing is we're going to achieve the same thing. So we're going to click on this More button, and we can add a new item. And this is using vanilla JavaScript, and then we're going to do it again using jQuery. So I may come back and talk about that, but let's look at the one using jQuery. So again, every time we click on this, we're going to get a new counter. And let me take a look at let's just inspect element and then watch. So here we go. See, it's got one li tag. Doot, doot, doot. Okay, so it's not that different. We're going and appending a child here. So let's just see how we do this in jQuery. Okay, let's take a look at the source. So the first thing that we'll notice is in the sort of jQuery style, we have HTML that has no JavaScript in it. Then we include the jQuery library, and then we're going to do some jQuery setup, and we're going to augment the HTML up here. And so it's pretty simple. We do document ready, which means that after the document's fully loaded, lines 12 through 16 are going to run. Lines 12 through 16 are going to run. And we're going to hook in an event to this little anchor tag. So we got an on-click event, and when that's going to call a function. And so these 3 lines of code are going to happen when someone clicks on more. So what are we going to do? Well, when someone clicks on more, we're going to console log that we clicked on it. Then what we're going to do is go grab the UL tag, # the list, which goes and finds the element that has the ID of list. And then we're just going to append to it. And then we're going to create a string, which will then be turned into HTML. And we're just going to concatenate an li, counter is, and then the number counter, and then we add 1 to the counter. And so this I find this pretty clear. We're just adding a string as if there was a string here between lines 5 and 6. And away we go. So we will click more, and it will add an item. And of course, it's adding to the counter, and so the number goes up. And so if we compare and contrast, view page source. If we compare and contrast the document object model of this and the jQuery of this, now this is really simple code. Okay. So in the document object model, we're sort of creating an element, we're adding to it, we have to know the various things that are in there, and then we're going to do get element by ID, because get element ID was, again, the thing we had in 1995, and then we're going to append a child. jQuery just feels to me just more like I can say what I want to happen. And so it's like jQuery is a higher level way of interacting with the document object model. And that's exactly what it is. And that's exactly what it is. jQuery is a library that's ultimately doing the exact same things to the document object model. It's just I don't have to write quite so much code, and I don't have to remember quite so many things, because jQuery says, you know, these are common things people do over and over, so I'm going to make it as easy as I possibly can and give you a pattern and say, just do it this way. And so that's how this all works. And so, like I said in the lectures, I'm not going to give you a ton of jQuery examples that I walk through code by code, because once you get the basic pattern down, it's just not that hard to use. So I hope you found this walkthrough useful. Cheers.
Hello and welcome to our lecture on Ajax and JSON. So we're going to change a little bit of how we have been working with our request response cycle. This is my happy little diagram of how these applications work, right? So you're sitting here in a browser and there's this thing called the document object model. And I like to think of the document object model as a data structure that represents, in a sense, the pixels that you're seeing on your screen. Like you're seeing me on a screen right now. It's that last little layer of the pixels. And the document object model is the data structure that the browser maintains to keep track of what it's going to draw. So if you scroll up and down, it knows what's below your window, etc. And when we're interacting, like clicking on things, we click on something in the document object model, and the browser goes, oh, I know what to do with that. I'm going to make a connection on port 80, send a GET request or whatever, and there is like your applications running in the server. It reads urls.py, picks one of the views, loads code up, maybe loads a form up, gets some templates, loads some data from a model, or maybe stores it in a model, and then sends, HTML plus JavaScript back. And the browser sees that from the server. It constructs the DOM, and then as we've seen, it sort of starts JavaScript. And that JavaScript afterwards, after, in a sense, there is no more connection, the JavaScript can talk to the browser. We've had it add things, delete things, change the color, show a spinner. We've done all that stuff, right? But now we're going to do something different. At the point where it is no longer connected, we are interacting with the DOM and doing things ourselves. We're clicking and scrolling and doing who knows what, right? But now that is going to be seen and intercepted by the JavaScript. And the JavaScript is going to make a request response cycle. It's still going to pick a view, going to grab maybe a template, some data, not so much form, model, and then send data back. And then Ajax is going to parse that data and update something on the DOM, and then you're going to see it. And it really allows a little chunk of the screen to be updated without having to update the whole screen. When we're doing the full request response cycle, like when we submit a form or click an anchor tag, that changes the whole page. Even though we've done things like put navigation across the top to make it look like it's not changing, now we are going to leave most of the page intact and change a little tiny bit of that page. And this is called Ajax, for a strange historical accident or whatever. So what we're talking about is data on the web. So the web was created in 1990, became popular in 95. And JavaScript came out in like 1995. And so almost 10 years later, we're looking at this JavaScript and realizing, if we just added one little thing to the browser and let the JavaScript make its own request response cycles, then we could do a lot with that. And so we're like, this is a really cool protocol. And we have all the server infrastructure to send HTML back. Why don't we make it so it sends something else back? And so the idea is the data would go back and forth between JavaScript. JavaScript already could talk to the document object model. 2003 is just a little bit before jQuery was built. But by the time jQuery was built, this whole Ajax data on the thing was going pretty well. So the first thing everyone thought of in the early times was the notion that we would send XML back and forth. And XML looks kind of like HTML. It has angle brackets. And XML was being used as a data representation format in many kinds of situations. It's still being used as a data representation format. But it turned out it wasn't as easy to use as a data interchange format. So there's a difference between two pieces of software sending data back and forth to each other and storing something on disk for a long time and then reading it like a Word document back and forth. So XML, which was really good for documents, we originally thought it was going to be good for sending data back and forth. And that is why it's called Ajax, because the X stood for XML, even though these days we hardly ever send XML. And in this class, I'm not going to bother sending XML, even though I could do it to prove the point. Ajax now is more of a generic. It doesn't really mean XML. And so once we decided that we were going to move data, we had to figure out a wire format. And so what would go back and forth across the wire? And the idea is, whether you're running in JavaScript or Java or PHP or Python, each of those has their own syntax for variables, their own syntax and their own methods, etc. And so those weren't seen as sufficient to move data back and forth. And that's why for a while we used XML as our wire format. So they would convert to XML and then convert from XML. But after a while, JavaScript turned out to be a much better solution as the wire protocol. And so JSON is a wire format, and at this point it's pretty much the most popular wire format. And so it looks like JavaScript constants with curly braces, key value pairs, and it also looks like Python, dictionaries, and lists, which is really, in the time of 2005, 2004, Python wasn't all that popular back then. And the fact that it looks like Python is like a historical accident where Python became popular much later, 2008, 2009, 2010, maybe. Certainly now, 2012, 13, Python's like crazy cool. But back in 2002, 2003, Python was still kind of like a shadowy language. Now, a wire format is a definition of what's supposed to run across the wire. So no matter what programming language, whether it's Python or JavaScript, you need to send it the right way. So inside of Python, you have a dictionary, then you have to prepare to send it across the internet, and you have to do what's called serialize, which converts it from the internal format to the agreed upon external format, and then it's transported, and then the destination end grabs it, deserializes it, decodes it, and then puts it into whatever form. In this case, it started out as a dictionary and it came back as an object. And so that's the idea, that JSON is while it's moving. And serialization is encoding it for movement, and deserialization is decoding it for movement. So the notion of JSON, I mean, now is a pretty well understood concept, but certainly in 2002, 2003, 2004, it's like XML is better. And so there was this moment where the world, the powers, the smart architects all thought that XML was the answer. Because it was an answer to some problems. It just wasn't the best answer for this. But when they built it first time, they decided that they would send it as XML. And Douglas Crockford and others were looking for a simpler, lighter way to send data back and forth. And they settled on the object literal notation, which is key value pairs and an array. And so it's a pretty nice, extensible, with nesting, an extensible format. Douglas Crockford is sort of the one who popularized this, but claims he rightly says he didn't invent it. He just looked at it and said, I like it. I'm going to start using it. And then had the advantage that JavaScript understood it. So half of the deserialization part was, on the JavaScript side, was pretty easy. And we didn't want to write a lot of JavaScript code back in the day, so the servers could figure out how to write this JSON, send it, serialize it out, and then it would be easy for the browsers to write relatively little code to fix it. Now we've got pretty good parsers in the browsers and they understand JSON, but the early kind of quick prototypes, it was really easy on the browser side if it looked like legitimate JavaScript. And so one of the problems is it was almost underwhelming, the idea that you just take this constant format, the syntax for JavaScript constants, and you turn it into a standard that says everyone, Java, C++, C#, C, whatever the server language, you got to write JavaScript. People are like, I don't know, that's not a standard, you just made that up. And he's like, no, JavaScript is as much a standard as anything else. And so he registered JSON.org, and he talks about this in the interview between him and me. And he registered JSON.org, and he wrote up a document that is JSON. Unlike most standards, it wasn't a government funded, it wasn't a standards organization like IEEE or ANSI or anything like that. It was just Doug Crockford did it, wrote it. And it was such a good idea that people just started using it, and they referred to JSON.org. Now, there's a subtle difference between JavaScript constant format and JSON, partly because you can put variables in the JavaScript, and so he simplified it. And so he kind of made it a subset of the JavaScript constant format, or the constant syntax. And so this is what it looks like. Looks like a dictionary and list, or in JavaScript terms, an object and arrays. And so you have key value pairs, like name maps to Chuck, age matched to 29, college is true. You can have numbers, you can have Booleans, You can have, but you can have nesting. So you can have inside of an object, you can have one of the attributes that points to a list of 2 strings. And then you can have an attribute inside the outer object being who here, that has itself an object. And so for example, if I wanted to get to this 10, I would say who dot skills dot C. And that would reference that number 10. And so that's just an object that has an attribute that itself is an object, and then that's an attribute of the inter object. So that's the basic JSON syntax, and it's pretty easy. I mean, I rarely have to look it up, right? Because it's so intuitive, and so that's one of the things that a lot of people really like about the JSON syntax. And so here we have the JSON syntax, and it's in JavaScript. So that exact same text, I'm going to write it who equals, and then I'm going to console log the who variable, and then out it comes. Okay, so it is really that's also. This part here is also completely legitimate JSON to send across between a client and a server using AJAX, and that's cool, but it's also really and totally a legitimate JavaScript constant. Like I said, there are things you can do in JavaScript you're not allowed to do in JSON. So when there's a view and it's got to produce some JSON, well, you're going to go to some URL, and then you're going to map that URL to some view, and in this case, I'm just going to do a GET request. And so I'm not going to use a class, I'm just going to use a function based. And in this particular case, I'm going to import JSON response. And JSON response is like HTTP response, but instead it's known to be JSON. And so the time sleep makes it so that when I run this, it pauses for a second so I can watch as it comes back. That's not what you would normally do. Then I have a little dictionary. And that dictionary this is a Python dictionary, a key value pair. It happens to look like JSON. And then I basically say serialize that and send it back. Now there's other things that have to happen. So this is just a standard. I could have made that a list. It's best practice in JSON for the outer thing to be an object. And so if you have a list, you have that as an attribute of the outer object. So you tend to want to make the thing that you pass back on JSON response an object or dictionary rather than a list. And so if you have a list, you put it inside of a dictionary. Okay, and so that's going to send that back. So if we were to hit this and just go to it in a browser, and go to JSON Fun, and this browser that I happen to be taking the screenshot sort of can show the raw data, which is just, this is the JSON. Now it looks like the dictionary, but it's not. This is a serialized JSON thing that looks like the dictionary, and you can see that's exactly what came back from that browser, and from that server. But then if you look at it parsed with JSON, then the browsers kind of know how to parse JSON, and so it looks up the curly braces and the single quotes, and it basically says this would make a JavaScript object where the first attribute is mapped to first thing and the second attribute is mapped to second thing. So browsers increasingly just know what JSON looks like, and so for debugging we get to see this, and it's kind of nice. Now the other thing that you would notice if you look really closely is if you took carefully a look at the headers, you will see that the content type is application/JSON. We've done a whole bunch of things: text/HTML, we've done text/plain, we've done image/PNG. I don't know if you've done application/PDF or not, but application/JSON is how we tell the browser that this is going to be JSON. And when we send a JSON response back from a view, that's what indicates to send this set this content type on the HTTP response protocol. And so that way the browser knows that it's getting JSON and not plain text and not HTML and not a PNG. So up next, we're going to take this and turn it into a simple chat application.
Hello and welcome to another screen recording of Django for Everybody. In this one, we're going to play with JSON a little bit. So notice it says this test will be replaced in 2 seconds, too short. Okay, so let's take a look at how that happened. So the first thing is we've got a little JSON endpoint. So I'll pop that up. And this JSON endpoint feeds us a little bit of JSON. And we can see the raw data It looks like JSON. It's just a URL. It just says JSON. And if I take a look at the headers, we see that, as you would expect, the content type is application/JSON. So this is a URL. So let's take a look at what it takes to cause this JSON fun URL return some JSON. And we'll take a look first at our urls.py. And we're just going to map it into views. Now this is a non-class style view. So here is JSON fun. Now one of the things that I do is time.sleep is not something you do in normal code. I just wanted it to take a little bit of time. But then what I do is I create a Python dictionary, and using JSON response, which is kind of like the next door neighbor to HTTP response, I am going to, instead of this would be if this was HTTP response, we'd be sending back a string, but instead we are sending back a dictionary, and so then it will serialize that into the right stuff. Now it looks the same. The difference is in Python it's a dictionary, and in JSON, it's an object. I mean, in JavaScript, it's an object, and it came across as JSON. So it's weird. It just so happens they have the same syntax, JSON, JavaScript object, and Python dictionary. But there is conversion here. And we could have much more complex stuff, nesting, etc., in here. And so let's then do this again. But now what we're going to do is look at the developer console and watch what really happens. So I will hit refresh now, and so we can watch in the developer console what happens. 2, 3, boom. And so we saw this console.log. So let's take a look at the source code of what makes that happen. So here we are in the source code. And first off, we've got this little paragraph, and that's what comes from the server. Now remember, what comes from the server when you do a view source, I just do that so fast. When I do a view source, I'm actually seeing what came from the server. The other time you can get it is if you go, I think, right here and get the right request and look at the response. Yeah, let's look at raw response payload. This, in the network tab, this is showing you what actually came from the server. Exactly what came from the server. I don't know why that's missing stuff. Oh, maybe because I got a cursor over it or something. I don't know. But view source is what came from the server. And so we put this ID in here, but that's not what's there anymore. So now I can see what's real. I can see the document object model. Oh, I didn't mean to view page source. I'm into inspect. Inspect element shows us what is the document object model, because so you saw that the JavaScript actually changed the document object model. So let's go back to view source so we can see how that's going to happen. So we've got our standard document ready function, these 2 lines at the beginning and end, just like whatever you put in here after it's loaded, as long as you have the jQuery library, away you go. So if this getJSON function within the $sign function, $getJSON, has 2 parameters. The first parameter is a URL to hit /chat/JSON fun. I've hard-coded it. I mean, it's hard-coded here. You'll see in a second how that is generated. And then when you're all done, call these 2 lines of code and pass the return data. So it's going to go grab this, and it's going to parse it, and it's going to turn it into an object, and then it's going to call our function and pass that object in there. The name data I just made up. So what it's going to do is it's going to use jQuery to go grab this, the ID tag of back on line 52 here, and then it's going to say, let's take data.first. Now data is an object, and .first is an attribute within that object. And if we take a look, data.first is the string first thing. And so that's how first thing ends up here. And then the next thing it does is just console logs, and that just gives me one more chance to talk about how awesome it is for you to console log things, and you can explore these objects and take a look. And there's 2 attributes in this object that came back, and so all the parsing is done, and it's turned into a JavaScript object. And so it's really quite beautiful that here at line 61 you have a JavaScript object that represents exactly the same information as in a Python dictionary. So this is it becomes Python dictionary, it's serialized, it's responded to, it's retrieved, it's deserialized, and then you just have it working in a different programming language. 2 programming languages, data structures in 2 programming languages, going back and forth in a super beautiful, awesome way. And so we'll come back and we'll talk about this chatting. I wanted to just show you how JSON works and then build a real simple application for that. That'll come up next. So hope this has been helpful. Cheers.
So now we're going to use JSON to build a very simple chat application. I love to use chat applications to play with JSON because really they are, and there are so many better ways to build a chat application than the way I'm building it. I'm just using this as a great way to talk about JSON. So what we're really going to end up doing here is we're going to have 2 windows, and each of them, 1, 2, each of them will be doing the same thing. And they both have a chat button. There's a back end. And when we press the submit and send a new chat message back, the other one is in a loop. And it's polling. It's checking to see if there's new chat messages. And when there is a new chat message, it uses AJAX to pull that back. The chat messages, an array of JSON objects. And then it updates this part here. And so that's the idea of JSON, is that we can use JavaScript to update some part of the screen and leave the rest of the screen alone. And so it's not like this whole screen has to blink. Now, when we're doing things like making menus at the top and moving back and forth, we make it look like certain things are not changing. But in this situation, everything outside that little chat box is not changing. We're going to do a full request response cycle when you type in something and press the chat button. So that's the basic idea of this application. So here is how it's working basically. You see, if you watch the network, every few seconds, about 4 to 5 seconds, it's doing a retrieval. So it does a retrieval, does a retrieval, does a retrieval. And what it's getting is a JSON array of little messages. And then it reads this array and then it displays them. It wipes this window out using jQuery and then it redisplays the messages. And in this case, it's not really getting the new messages, it's getting all the message and it's just rewriting the whole thing. And so if you got to watch to make sure that you see the new messages coming. So here's a bit of code in urls.py. We have just the main view to do the talking. And then the messages is just going to be our bit of JSON stuff, okay? And our model.py, it's pretty simple. It's got an owner. We're going to use the owner pattern, even though we're going to do a little bit more of the work ourselves. And it has a text field, and that's pretty much it, other than the stock date fields that we normally have. So if we take a look at the views.py, we're going to do simply a rendering of talk.html. You'll see when we get to talk.html that the dynamic part, you might be surprised, like, where are all the old messages? The old messages normally would be retrieved right in here, but they're not, because we're going to do that in JavaScript. And that bit of like retrieve the messages, the most recent messages, is going to be done in the browser now rather than in the server. So it's going to be a request to show the page, and then the page is going to start and go grab the messages. And we just have a normal form, and we're going to grab the message text from that form, and then add the owner to be request user, and then save it, and then we're going to redirect back to ourselves. And so that's the view, and that's really quite simple. The interesting part is in the template, and so we have a bunch of stuff in the template. This part here is pretty straightforward. We have that form that's at the top, and the form is at the top, and we got leaving, we got reset, we got a chat button, we're going to post back in, and then we have this chat content, and that's important because the chat content is that part on the screen that we're going to replace over and over and over again. So one of the things that we're doing here is we're going to grab a spinner and grab a URL to a little spinner that we've got stored in a static area. And that spinner, you know, one of those little dot, 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 dot things that goes round and around, that's just an animated GIF. And what we're going to be doing is you put that out so that if it turns out that somehow your JSON is not working, the spinner stays there, and that's kind of a clue to you, at least as a developer, and maybe to your poor end user, that it's not running. But the idea is that spinner will be running, but then it'll immediately be replaced by the data we pull in from JSON. So here's the interesting part. This is a function that right now it's just going to call a function, and we'll get this started up in a bit. This function is going to do the hard work. The function is the part that's going to get triggered every once in a while to go retrieve all of the data. So we'll just call this function update message, and what it's going to do is it's going to go give us a console log, and then we're going to grab get JSON, which is jQuery to retrieve a JSON URL, and then this get JSON takes two parameters. The first is a string, which is a URL. The second is a bit of code, and then the data that comes back from the JSON, meaning this data right here, which is an array of arrays, is going to be passed in as rows. So, you know, until you're really comfortable, I put a console.log so you see each time it's called. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do chat content empty, and remember the chat content is that little part right there that we're going to wipe that out. That's just a jQuery to wipe it out. And then I'm going to loop through the rows. Yeah, we're going to loop through the rows. For var, we're going to loop. There's two rows here. Rows.length is 2, and then we're going to grab it, and then we're going to say we're going to append a paragraph tag in the first part of the row, plus a break tag and 2 non-blank spaces. That's so that it indents 2 spaces. That's the time underneath the text. And then we're going to take the second element of that row and print out a paragraph tag. And so that's what is going to put the rows of the chat. That's going to wipe it out and then fill it back up. We just append it. Append around and around and around and go through and append. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set the timeout to call ourselves again in 4 seconds. So that basically says this is actually part of vanilla JavaScript, and we're saying 4,000 milliseconds from now, or 4 seconds from now, call this again. And so it's only going to do this after it has successfully got the JSON back. And so if the system starts slowing down, after it's done the update of the little part of the screen with the chat messages, then it's going to say, and then run me again in 4 seconds. And that's what's going to happen every 4 seconds. But then what we're going to do is also, after that, we're going to trigger that we're going to get this thing started. And so we're going to say, under document ready, there's the document ready, these 3 lines, we're going to tell Ajax not to cache that data because we expect every time we're going to call, we want the new messages. We're going to call update message, which is immediately going to start an Ajax request and then rewrite chat content and then wait 4 seconds and then do it again and again. And so this is like priming our timing loop. Okay? And then once we've done that, the only thing left to do is look at what is going to happen in that code that's going to give us back all those Ajax messages. So this is the talk messages. That's our URL that's going to do that. It's a get request, and we're just going to go read all of the message objects ordered by created at, the first 10 of them. So that's what that does. And we're going to, instead of just sending the messages down, we're going to augment it. And so we're going to take the message text, and then we're calling natural time. Natural time is the thing that says 13 minutes ago or 14 minutes ago instead of some long, ugly time thing. And that's something we're getting from Django. And so that is the result. The results is a new array. Messages is an array, and results is the array that looks like this. And what we've done is we've changed this second parameter basically for each of the messages using natural time. And then results, in this case, is an array. Actually, it's a list. I'm confusing my JavaScript and my Python. We're in Python right now, and so it's a list. And then we just return a JSON response, which serializes that into JSON and sends it all back. So you kind of get the idea of how you build a chat, and you can see how this is what's coming back, and it's hitting this messages, and this little cache equals false is adding this so that the URL does not seem to be the same URL from the browser's perspective. So it's really just taking a timestamp and appending it so the browser sees it not as the URL it retrieved before, so it doesn't have any chance to cache. And so that's really a quick look at how you might use JSON to build a really simple chat application. It's not the best way to build a chat application. There's a thing called WebSockets that makes your chat application more efficient and more responsive. But again, this is a very simple background task to retrieve information from the server using AJAX and JSON.
Hello and welcome to another Django for Everybody code walkthrough. We're going to do another walkthrough of a different part of the chat application. And so this time we're going to actually do some chatting. And I probably won't need this now. This chat is really designed to run simultaneously. So normally this would be two different logged in users. This chat doesn't really do anything particularly for logged in users. So I'm just going to use two windows logged in as the same user. But so the idea is, and we can see this going on right now. If we do a tools developer console, we can just watch. We can watch this, clear it, and you'll see that every 4 seconds it's making a request and it's getting some JSON back. Requesting JSON, yeah, I got it. Requesting JSON, I got it. And then we can watch in this other window at the same time. Clear this. Every 4 seconds, it's going to do an AJAX request, requesting JSON. Now, if we watch the network tab, we can see what it's doing. It's requesting JSON. Now, the page is not refreshing. What's happening is, in the background, in JavaScript, it's actually talking to the server, okay? And it's doing that every 4 seconds, and it's doing the same thing in both of them. So this is a polling application. You know, these could be on completely different computers. It's polling to see if any new messages have shown up. So I'm going to say new message. Now, this is just a traditional form, and this is going to submit. So you'll see a post redirect that happens here. Boom, boom, post redirect. I'll come back to that. And then that new message already appeared just because the timing was perfect, right? And so I typed it in on this one, and it worked. So here is the post. It posted that message. Here's parameters. It sent new message, and it sent the CSRS middleware token. And then the post did a redirect back to talk, and then it showed the messages. So this reset, cancel, chat, this is just a standard form. I guess let's just take a look at the page source here. This form is a standard form. It just is submitting it. It's submitting it with a post, and it's just standard stuff with a CSRF middleware token, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the posting of new messages is not the tricky part of this. So let's walk through the simple posting of new messages. Talk, the /talk goes into my views.py, and so this is my talk main. And I guess I should probably, I don't need this one anymore. Let's take a look at the models file. Take a look at the model file. So there is a data model for this. It is a one-to-many. We got text fields. We got a primary key. Everybody can put more fields in so that we do know who they're owned by, so that we know who is allowed. We do have an owner, but we don't have any trashing, so we don't have any delete. This is really quite simple at this point. And so we got the two fields created at and updated. Of course, are handled automatically. So do not worry about this bit right here. That's just so that for my online system, all it's doing is it's throwing away chat messages that are more than 60 minutes old. You could put code in there like this, but this really doesn't implement it. It just is something because of samples that's online. Don't worry about that. What it's really doing here is just rendering chat/talk.html. Okay, so that's what the GET request is. So that means if we just hit enter here, I'll come here, hit enter here, that's what happens. Okay, And then a few seconds later, I get the messages show up. But you'll also notice that when I just hit enter and I do a GET request to that page, for a little while I see a spinning GIF. Okay, and so that all happens here in chat/talk.html. But before we leave the view, it's pretty straightforward. When we hit the chat button here, it's going to send a post data and the name of this form. Inspect element, that's what I wanted. The name of this thing is a name message, right? And so I'm going to say post message, request post message, and I'm going to set the owner field. This is just a model, message model. Then I'm going to store it, and I'm going to redirect back to the GET request. All right. So that's how I do cool new message, and that's what happens when I press this button. Now we're going to find out how in this other tab, boom, cool new message shows up 2 seconds ago, right? I did nothing in here other than navigate to the tab. And now we want to see how that all works. So let's talk first about the HTML. It comes down here. This is the source as created, and this is the template that creates the source. It's a pretty straightforward template. You know, we got some chat main. The chat static is a little bit weird. And so let's take a look at how that works. That is this line 63. Chat static generates this. And if I look at my URLs, I'm mapping the static to something that's in a folder. So let's pop up a thing, ls-l. So in static, there's a single file called spinner.gif. And if I take a look at what spinner.gif, I think this will open it in. Yeah, so spinner.gif is just an animated GIF image of this little spinner. Also looks kind of like a Walmart logo. And so if you look at the page that's generated from the view source, and we've been sitting here for minutes now, but if you look at what originally came from the server, you see that there was, didn't mean to click there. Let's do it again. View source, come down. Here on line 62, what came from the server was HTML that put that spinner out, okay? And that just is our way. So I've put this spinner here in case the JSON Ajax doesn't work. Because if it were to blow up, right? If it were to blow up, that thing would run there. Now I've artificially slowed this down, and I'll show you how I did that, just to let that spinner show for 1001, 1002, boom, now it's gone. I can make that speed up a lot by changing this chat talk, but just understand that we often fill the areas that we're going to replace with a spinner so that if something goes wrong, we have given our users a clue. Okay? So then we're going to build function update message, and it's probably easier to look at it in view source. So oh dang it, I did it again. I didn't mean to click on that. There we go. So update message. So $getJSON takes one parameter /chat/messages, which of course is the URL for chat::messages, which maps to urls.py, chat::messages, which is talk messages view, which is, we don't need this anymore. That's this view right here, talk messages. We're going to make it be a login required mix-in, and then we're going to read all the messages by looking at our message model, message objects all, order by, descend and create, add, and give me the first 10. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to call this natural time. Natural time is a really cool little Django feature that gives us times, and it says 7 minutes ago, 3 minutes ago, rather than some big long time that looks like with long dates and February 22nd, Wednesday, 2020, or whatever it is, right? So I could send messages here into, I could send the messages back, but then I would have to convert these into prettier things, but I want to convert these inside of Django because I have this wonderful utility. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop through the message array that I got back, and I'm going to return, I'm going to make a new array, and it's an array of arrays basically, and it's a to thing where I got the text of the message and a pretty version of the time, and then I append that to the array, and then I return the array. So I'm returning an array. Now it turns out an array of arrays. It turns out that having the outer result, having the outer thing be an array is actually sort of tacky, but it's really supposed. So if we look at, for example, we go to the network, and we look at this, and we look at the response, we see that it is an array of arrays, right? Let me make this so I can click better on it, right? It's an array. The outer object, the outer thing in our JSON is an array, and then I've got just a linear list of arrays. And there's 2 items in each array. One is the time, one is the text, and the other is the time. And so this message payload that's coming back, this is that results. And of course, JSON response serializes it, and then we're going to see how we deserialize it, right? And I think I might be able to open this in a new window. Can I open? Yes, I can. So I've got this opened. If I look at the raw data, that's what the raw data looks like. If I look at the parsed JSON, it's an array with 0 and 1 and 0 and 1. And if I look at the headers, it, of course, is application/JSON. And all that work of producing the response is here in talk messages, where we create a data structure inside a variable, inside of Python, and then we just serialize it and send it out using Django's built-in response. Okay, so that shows how we put messages in. That shows how we feed messages out in the format of JSON. Now let's talk about how we get those messages into the screen. Okay, and that's this update message. So update message is just a function. We'll eventually, in document ready, we're going to say, hey, Ajax, don't cache the messages. And so what that's doing is adding this little number that changes. It's really just the time, but that means that the browser is not supposed to, sometimes when the browser sees the same URL over and over and over again, it's like, oh, I already got a copy of that. And we're like, no, don't let us. So we're saying, don't cache it, put a little thing on it so the URL is actually changing. It's just, this question mark is like a query parameter, and it forces the URL to change. Then what we're going to do is we're going to wait 2 seconds and then call update message. We could call update message right here if we were in a hurry, but I'm going to wait because set timeout is vanilla JavaScript that basically says run this code, run this code, and it's a string with code in it. But hey, it's JavaScript, and code and data are kind of equivalent. And wait 2 seconds, 2000 milliseconds. So this right here, instead, I could say update message right now, and then it would start immediately, but that is, this set timeout is why when I press refresh, I get to see my cool little spinny thing for a few seconds, then it's too late, okay? So otherwise I would just call update message. Got it? Okay, now, at some point, this timer will expire, 2000 seconds will expire, and then it will call update message. So, 2 seconds later, it starts calling this code. And so you see it says requesting JSON, and then it calls jQuery to ask for some JSON, and it calls chat/messages, parses it all, deserializes it all, and then calls my code with the resulting messages. The resulting messages, all those messages, which is an array of arrays, passed in as the variable rows, and I immediately console log it. So now if I'm going to go look at the console logging, I can say what's coming back. Oh, it's an array. How come there's only one? How come there's only, oh, okay, yeah, it's an array, and in that was 3 minutes ago. How come I'm not seeing all the rest of them? Maybe it's only showing me, yeah, it's only showing me the first one, but there you go. So I'm console logging it. I put these console logs in just because I'm so nervous all the time. Did it really work? Am I really running my code? Because the browser, when it blows up, is really quite silent, right? Very, very silent. Okay, let's go back and take a look at web developer network. Yada, yada. Okay, so at some point, I am gotten called. I log it. Then what I do is I go up to chat content, which has initially it has the spinner on it, and then I empty it out. That's jQuery, just emptied out, and then I go through and I loop through all the rows, which might be 0. If it is 0, then you're going to see nothing. And then I'm going to grab the row sub I, which, you know, each row has 2 things in it, and then the message is the sub 0 element, and the time is the sub 1 element. And I'm just using jQuery append to throw a little paragraph in with that text. So if you were to do an inspect element here, you would see that this is a paragraph. Oh, come back, chat content. So let's see if we can catch it. We might catch it emptying it out and then filling it back up. Doesn't look like we're going to catch it. But basically it wipes all this stuff out. Oh, there it did. You see what it did? So here it is, and now it's going to wipe it out and then fill it back up with the same thing. Okay? So you'll see how it does an empty of that whole div, and then it fills it back up. And so we can see it. Here comes, emptied out, and then fill it back up. And it's got the same stuff. Now what's happening is it's all happening so quick that we don't see any flicker or anything here. But every 4 seconds, this is being rewritten and rewritten and rewritten. Oh, and you'll notice that my selection died because it's not the same. It's not the same text anymore. It's not selected because it got deleted. I selected something and it's about to get deleted. Here goes, deleted, come back. Oh, and you'll also notice the 11 minutes change. So, and at the end of this, when it's successfully returned, we say, well, run me again 4 seconds from now. So the set timeout, once it runs it, it's 1 time. There's another way in JavaScript to say run this every 4 seconds. But I actually prefer waiting for it to succeed because it turns out, and I'm not going into it in great detail, but these things can have errors. And then you can put extra code in here to handle errors. But what I'm doing here is I'm only running this if it is successful. And so I'm only running it again. Why bother? And if it is slow, because this is asynchronous code, it takes a while, in this case a zillionth of a second, it takes a while between the time it starts the request and the time it gets the data back and calls our code. But let's just say that the server was overloaded. It might take 2 seconds between the start of the request and the call of the code. And so this just says that if it's it'll be 6 seconds everything, because if it's slow, I'm going to only add 4 more seconds. So I wait till it's all done, I wait till I get my data, and then I say, okay, run me again in 4 seconds. Now, this ultimately is a very simple polling application, which is inefficient, and there is a technology called WebSockets that makes this a whole lot better. But we'll talk about that perhaps some other day. Cheers. Hello and welcome to another walkthrough for Django for Everybody. In this particular walkthrough, we're going to play with the favicon. And so the favicon is a special little icon that shows up at your root /favicon.ico. There's a whole series of favicons, but this is sort of the original classic one. And you should be able to see it. And it's also what happens in your bookmarks or your little tabs. And so it's kind of a fun little way to brand your site. And if you've been grabbing my code, you have got a favicon sitting here in Django's home static favicon.ico. And if you look at urls.py down later, it adds a path using the static file server, and it sort of goes to the base directory of the Django application and adds home static. And then if there's a path that matches, this is the path that matches, then this is the file that it looks up, and then that serves up the contents of that file at favicon.ico. Now, what you want to probably do is make your own favicon. So let's go ahead and make our own favicon. Here is a favicon converter, and let's go ahead and grab a file. Let's see, Sakiger. Going to make a little Sakiger icon instead. And so I did it. It converted it to an icon. Let's see what we got here. And I'm going to download a zip file with a bunch of icons, and it'll go into my downloads. So here it came into my downloads. It's already downloaded it, and that is an icon. And so an icon is a special kind of an image. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into here, and I'm going to upload and overwrite this with a new file. And so here we go. I'm going to upload that favicon. And I believe it's uploaded right this second. Now, here's a weird thing. Now I should be able to go here, and I should be able to press refresh. I don't think reloading my application is going to make much difference at this point, but icons are heavily cached by the browser. So one thing to do is just, ooh, I didn't mean to start that. Didn't mean to start Camtasia. Sorry, didn't mean to start that. So I can go here in a different browser, and I can see the icon. Or I can add a get parameter, and then I can see that icon. X equals 3. And now I can see the icon. So So if you come here and you press refresh, what you'll find is these icons are heavily cached. And that's just because you don't want to overload the server getting an icon on every page. So to really do this right, the way to force the cache, and we've seen this like in JSON, you can add a get parameter x equals 42. And that basically says it's going to ignore this, and it's just going to get, because that's a query parameter, it's not part of the path. And it's going to load the new icon. So it might take a while before you're going to see that icon show up, and so don't feel too bad. If you can do this thing where you go directly and you add this question mark, you should be able to see your brand new icon. And then later, or maybe if you run with a different browser, but if you've used a different browser and it's got a cached icon, away it goes. And you can go Google how to clear the favicon on my browser, and you'll find it's not trivial. So this is the way that I do it. I just add a get parameter, and then that does it. So I hope this little favicon walkthrough was helpful to you. Cheers. Hello, and welcome to another walkthrough for Django for Everybody. In this walkthrough, we're going to look at social login. And we're going to use GitHub to do our login. And we're going to use a piece of code called Social Login Framework. And you can read this. This is the link documentation to social login. You can read through all this stuff, but I've actually, in my home, I've already done most of this, and if you based some of your stuff on the settings. So if you've been using my code for a while, every time you say manage.py, it says if you want to use social login, please see this file, and which registration it's doing. And so we're actually going to, it's not really broken, but you'll notice now I'm going to show you where these messages are coming from and what we are about to change. So, bring this one over here. So first off, where those messages are coming from is down here deep in the settings.py, about line 176. It's going to import from GitHub settings.py. And GitHub settings.py is a file, but this file doesn't yet exist. So if you go into DJ Free Samples, you will see that there is a GitHub settings dist, but there is not a GitHub settings.py. So this blows up, and otherwise, it prints that message. So there's where that message happens. And so if you look at the documentation, we're going to put the GitHub OAuth 2 backend, etc., etc. Okay? So what we need to do basically is we need to take this file. There is a file called GitHub settings dist.py, and we have to make a new empty file called GitHub settings py. So create that new empty file. And then the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just take all of this and we're going to paste it into it. So from the dist. So this idea of a file with a dist name, that means it's kind of the distribution file, it's not the real file. And so I'm just going to save this file for now. Now the problem, and so if I go here, back here, I believe that at this point it won't say anything because we have a file, right? And it says we've switched to using, it was using login, and then now it's using login social. And so the login is a registration template. So this was the login that you've been using until you turn the social on. And it has some rules that says, you know, here's where you do the URL, you get a form, etc. So you get to set this login. This is a long time ago that we set this thing. But social login, if you read all the documentation, read all this documentation, social login, you have a different way of doing it. So this is asking if that social auth GitHub key has been set properly, and that's this key right here, and otherwise it's not set. So if it gets set, then it's going to do a link to this social begin GitHub. And this is something that's documented in this Django framework. So somewhere in here is the begin. Yeah, so this is an example of how you call Google. So you do this social colon begin. And this social, going back to settings.py, oh, we got to go into the urls.py. So let me go here and then go into urls.py. So there we do add something here, and that is that we switch to social login. We try to import that same GitHub settings, and if we do get GitHub settings, we switch to using the different template, and you say template name, and then use that as social for our social login. Okay, and then it prints out this little error message. Okay, so that redirects to social login, and we also have OAuth, the social namespace social for the social Django URLs. Now that social Django URLs is configured by some of those settings. Okay. Okay, so we have this file called github-settings.py, but we can't use GitHub yet because we have to get a key and a secret. And so the instructions are right here. So we go to GitHub developer settings. Now I'm not going to show you the ones I'm using for the projects or the samples, but what you do is you just add a new OAuth app. My cool app samples. And I give you some example things to put in here. So this home page is really samples dj4e.com. Samples, and then you've got to set the login, and this is what you're going to need, although I got to update it. The application, I got to change this to be samples.dj4e.com. Okay, and then I register the application, and now I have an ID and a secret. Don't worry, I'm going to delete this later. So then what you do is you go into settings, not settings dist, and then you go in and you paste that in, and then you paste this secret in. I hope I got the secret right. Yeah, this secret. So now I save it, right? So I save it, and let me go into my web tab, because this is my pay account. And I'm going to go to samples and reload samples. I'll just go over here and I'll do a manage.py check. And I hope everything is right still, but it's a good test. And it is using the social login, and it looks fine. Okay, so I've got that. Now let's just see what happens when I say log out. And now if I say log in, I get this login with GitHub because I set that. So if all goes well, I should be able to log into GitHub. Now what's happening is GitHub is asking Charles Severance, me the logged in user, whether or not to share the data to my Cool App samples. Okay, so I'm going to authorize it, and then it's going to send back, and then I'm logged in. And interestingly, now it knows who I am. It's a GitHub account, and like if I go into, where are we at? Where's the menus at? Menu, because that is based on that email account. That's a gravatar that's based on the email account. So now I'm logged in, and away it works. So that's the basic idea. It really comes down to create this GitHub settings, use the GitHub settings dist, and away you go. Yeah, the GitHub settings dist, and you copy that into GitHub settings, and then you put your real account in there. Now I'm going to go ahead and go back and delete this application so you can't use my keys. Now it's not going to work anymore. Okay, so there I go. So I hope this was helpful to you, that walk you through a little bit of what it takes to get GitHub authentication working. I would observe that the reason I chose GitHub is that you can do the same with Twitter and you can do the same with Google, but they're a lot, they don't trust you as much, and so you have to do a lot more work to prove to them that you're worthy of using Google and Twitter instead of or Facebook. Those are all much higher bars to get permission to use it. GitHub is really easy. So hope this was helpful. Cheers. Hello and welcome to another of the sample code walkthroughs on Django for Everybody. This particular sample walkthrough is the favorite things. You can see the source code here in favs. Hopefully you have, like I do, the whole source code of this entire DJ-free samples checked out somewhere, maybe on your local computer, or maybe on a separate Python Anywhere website in a way that you can watch it. And if you don't have that, you can play with these samples here at samples.dj4e.com. I'm going to run my local copy. So let's talk a little bit about what we're doing. We're really demonstrating many-to-many accounts, but in this case we're also demonstrating Ajax. And I can show you how Ajax works at a high level. So normally if I click on, raindrops on roses and all things, you see an entire request response cycle. You see lots of things going on here. And if I click on this, I go up to here, the very first page is a bunch of HTML that came out, and then the rest of it is like the Bootstrap, etc., that was loaded by that page. So you have to kind of scroll back up. But now I'm going to clear this. I'll go back to all things. So that was one page with lots of sort of derivative stuff. But what we're going to do in this is when we hit this favorite button, we're not going to see a full screen refresh. We've got some JavaScript code in here that's going to make this, when I click on it, it's going to make it filled in. But it's also going to have to update something in the database so that it remembers that this is one of my favorite things for the logged in user. So I'm going to hit it, and you see that I hit this favorite, and that called a view inside the server which updated the state. And now if I refresh the whole page, it's going to show it to me, and it's remembered this, right? So I refreshed the entire favorite list. And if I add a new one, whiskers on kittens, this is just a normal bit of code that's not that different. Sound of music. So like this one I've got a favorite, this one I don't have a favorite, right? I don't have that favorited. But Ajax is the way that we can it's just JavaScript and jQuery that's updating the UI, but we can change data on the server by just hitting a URL, in this case with a post request. So if we look at this, it actually sent a post request. If you recall, we're not supposed to change the server state on a GET request. So this is, to not be tacky, we're going to send a post request. And again, if you see this in the source, which we will, you don't want a spider to go down these GET requests. They'll see these URLs in the JavaScript, and we just hope, and they won't do it because they see it's a post request. So so if I hit refresh now, the data has been updated. So if I take a quick look at the admin user interface, oops, admin, and I look at favs. This is my many to many. Well, let me just stay here, right? So this means that the user DJ4E likes raindrops, and so if I do a refresh here, so that means that me, the logged in user, DJ4E, likes this. Now, if I say I would also like whiskered on kittens, it's going to update the database. See there? And then if I come over here, I can hit refresh, and you see that DJ4E likes raindrops. And it's just a many-to-many table with an outward connection to raindrops on roses and another outward connection to the user DJ4E. Now I'm going to delete this. I'm going to delete this from within the administration. Now this is exactly what the undelete button does. Now, the state of the system doesn't know that I deleted this in the background, but if I hit refresh, you see it now knows that it's deleted, and because it actually went and it queried all those tables, and there was really only one favorite. Okay? So let's take a look at the way this kind of comes together. We will eventually get back to all this JavaScript. So let's start with the models. The model, yeah. So thing, of course, has some title, like a lot of things, some text. We have a foreign key into owner because we want to be able to mark these things as belonging to somebody. This owner right here indicates who owns it, i.e. who will get the edit and delete, just like everything we've done that does that. Favorites is the new bit we're adding. And so we're basically saying, okay, we're going to, so this foreign key is a one-to-many, right? Because that's one user to many things. But this is the many-to-many. And this is also to auth user. Normally many-to-many is three tables, the kind of the left table, the right table, and the middle table. Well, in this case, we got the one table, but the right table, as it were, is the user model itself. And that's okay, because the user model is a table, and all we're doing with settings.auth user model is knowing what table that is. And of course, the created at and updated at and the title, that does. So this is our through model, and of course, when you're in the middle of a foreign key, you effectively have a foreign key to the left and a foreign key to the right. And so this is like, we have a foreign key back to thing, and that's a one-to-many relationship, and then we have a foreign key to the users, and that's a one-to-many relationship. In this case, the onDelete models equals cascade means if a thing is deleted and there's a fav row that references the thing, the fav rows that reference the thing will be deleted. And the same is true for if a user gets deleted, all the fav rows except. So either side, either left or the right of this, we could, if one of those records goes, the corresponding records in fav will be deleted. And you can either delete things or you can delete users, and the fav rows are sort of automatically maintained. Now the one thing we're doing here is a little different than what we did in the comments one, is we've added this unique together. And that simply means that you can't insert more than one combination of a thing and a user. So it's not like you can favorite it a lot. If you keep hitting favorite, there's only one row. If there's a row in here that exists, i.e. right here, if this row exists and it connects the two, then it's favorited. So in the other examples, you'll notice that we modeled something at this connection. This is really a pure many-to-many. And this unique together basically says the only data that matters is the actual connection between thing and user. And this is just kind of a little fancy way to make it so that the admin user interface looks really cool. Right? DJ4E likes whiskers. That's what you're doing with these string classes. Okay? So, of course, you'll do your migrations when you get that. That's already taken care of. Let's take a look at a couple of things. Let's just start with urls.py. Make it a little smaller so it sort of fits better, a little wider. There we go. So this looks very similar to a lot of things that we've done. We've got a main view, we got a detail view, we got a create view, delete view. So those are all sort of, we've talked about those before and we've used those. This is the new thing here. And so this is the URL that we're going to hit if we're going to do a favorite or an unfavorite, and it is the primary key of the thing. And that's why I name this thing/thing primary key. I might want to even call that thing PK, and then favorite. right? And then that's going to call the add favorite view. And of course, this thing favorite is just a way to reference it in templates and in views. And the same thing for unfavorite. So we've got a little tiny add favorite view and a delete favorite view. And in terms of this, the only real code that we're going to change from previous examples is the list view, because the list view has to be augmented to actually show the little asterisks, and the list template has got to be augmented. As a matter of fact, the most complex bit of this is the list view, and these two have got to be added as well. So let's take a quick look at the views. Let me go ahead and cd templates / favs. So let's start with our list view. Okay, and go a little larger. There we go. Here's our list view, and let's take a look at our list view. So the first thing is, because of that owner field, right, I am going to import the owner detail view, owner list view, and owner create view. And so I've got that, and actually I'm importing it from a different project. That's okay. This owner.py is in the myarts, but you might have it also locally. It'd be owner.py. So again, the whole idea here is that the owner field in the models, vi models.py, this owner field is managed, like in many of these, by us creating my / myarts owner. And basically we're creating this owner list view, the owner detail view, owner create view, and if you recall from these are the places where we've kind of overridden the original automatic create view, automatic update view, which we've used for lots of things, except when we're creating it, we've got to put the request user in right before we split the save into two pieces, and then we half save it, then we set the owner field, then we finish the saving, and then the update view and the delete view is more about the query set, and it basically says, I'm not going to let you retrieve this for update. That's what query set is. I'm not going to let you retrieve this for update unless you own it. And so that's what this is basically saying, is I'm going to also filter these based on the owner must be equal to the current logged in user. And this code right here, is exactly the same for delete. So what we're doing is loading the record prior to delete, and we're saying, look, if you don't own it, I'm not going to load it, which means you can't delete it because it gets a 404 not found. And so again, that's in the delete view and the update view, right? That's all here because it's going to do a get or 404, right? And so in there, it does a get 404. Again, this particular one, we got to do our own get or 404. And inside delete view and update view, it's going to do a get or 404, get object or 404. And then this code right here, if it's like ID equals primary key and owner equals self.request user, the answer is no, and so this is going to blow up, this delete view and update view. Now, that's just a review of stuff we've been doing for a couple of examples, so I'm not going to go into super great detail. So what I want to do is I want to show you thing list view. Now actually it does owner list view, but if you go back and look at owner list view, it doesn't really do anything other than the base one. But so it's basically looks like most of these, except what we've done is we've overridden the get request. So we're overriding the get request. And some of this is the stuff that's part of the default, meaning it always would go get thing list objects.all, and it would always pass into the template thing list. And if you take a look at the template, right, what it does is it checks to see if there's a thing list, then it loops through it, and then it prints all this stuff out. And literally, a lot of this is very similar to everything we've done with previous sample code, right? But the problem is we need to get the data so that we can know the starting value, whether these are supposed to be filled in or not, right? And so what we do is we say, okay, and we only gonna do that if they're authenticated, because if we're not logged in, if I log out, I don't have any favorites. I can't unfavorite thing. I can't favorite things because I'm not logged in. And so I don't do this, right? So if the user's authenticated, then I'm going to do this. And it also means that in the template, all of this stuff, this is the favorite code, only happens and only shows if the user's authenticated. So I'll log in, DJ4E, log in, and now it's actually pulling this extra data. And so here we are in views. If the user's authenticated, let's go to the current logged in user and get a list of their favorite things, but only the ID field. Now, this would give you a list of objects, and each object would be ID:1, ID:2, ID:3. And so we use a bit of list comprehension so that I end up with a favorites that's just a list of the IDs of the things for which I have a favorite. So in this case, if this is like thing 1, and this is thing 4. And so in this list, that list will be just 4 because 4 is favorited and 1 is not. So I might have 50 of these, and you might only have 2 of them favorited. And when it's all said and done, this favorites list, if you printed it out, okay, let's print it out. Print favorites. Print that out, and you will see, let me hit refresh here, and then go over to my run server, and it's a list with the number 4 in it. So 4 is a favorite, and 1 is not a favorite. If I hit this, and then I hit refresh, and I look at this print, you'll see that 4 and 1 are my favorites, right? And then if I unfavorite 4 and I hit refresh, you will see that 1 is the favorite, okay? Now that then drives into that, and that just is passed right here into the template, yeah? And then we have this new stuff in the template. Now we're in the middle of looping through all the things, which this is the loop that goes through all those things. But here we are in the middle if the user is authenticated. And so we basically have some code. Anchor tag href equals # is our key that says don't actually go anywhere. And the onClick is the method. And that's going to call some JavaScript. And it's going to call as a parameter, see I got a single quote here, the URL for the thing unfavorite of thing ID. And I'm also passing thing ID as a parameter. So if you do a quick inspect element right here, inspect element, you see that onClick favPost, this is a URL to hit, and that's the ID. So I'm passing those in as parameters and then return false. We'll go through that JavaScript in a second. And I also give this an ID so that I can reference it down in that function that I'm going to build in a second. So that's here, ID equals favorite. Now, I need to decide whether or not to show which of these two to show. So it turns out that there's actually 2 stars. And what I'm really doing is I'm showing 1 star or the other. You don't notice that, but if you look down here, there are actually 2 stars. Here's 1 star, and here's the other star. So there's actually, I can see if I can convince it. If I can convince where is, oh, it's got to be here, display none. If I can change this to be display inline, you'll see that there's really 2 stars. And all I'm doing, now this is not going to be much, this is not going to work. I don't know how well this is going to work because I manually unhit it, but there's actually 2 stars, right? But what happens is that I hide the star that's filled and show the star that's filled appropriate. So let me refresh to get it so that, but there's 2 stars there. One is hidden and one is not. So it turns out that what this is this is 2 bits of making a star, and all I'm doing is I'm stacking 2 stars. I'm stacking an orange star on top of a blue outline star. And then what I'm doing it twice. So that's a link. But what I'm doing is if the current thing is in the favorite list, remember I did that, then I'm going to add a style equals display none. And if, in this case, if it's not in the favorite list, I'm going to hide this one, right? This is the unfavorite. and this is the favorite. And if it's in favorites, I'm going to hide the favorite. So if it's already a favorite, I'm going to show the empty star that's got an unfavorite link. Show empty star. Show a full star with an unfavorite link underneath it. My mind gets all messed up on this. And then if it is in favorites, show a filled in star with an unfavorite. Yeah. If it's not in favorites. Oh, right. I got, it's almost a double negative, right? If it's not in favorites, hide it. So this kind of flips, but okay. So this is an empty star that'll, if you click on it, favorites it, and this is a filled in star that if you click on it, unfavorites it. Okay? So let's take a look at this. Now then there's the tricky bit. The tricky bit is that when you click on the one that you can see, and in this case the one I can see is this one, right? So I'm here, I can see this one. So it's going to click on fav post passing in fav's thing unfavorite, where that is the key of the thing. Here's the whole thing, right? And passing in that number. We'll see what that's for in a sec. Okay, so now I'm going to switch to the JavaScript that handles this. Okay, so now we got this function fav post, and you don't have to modify this. So this is the URL that we're going to post to. We're actually going to send no data to it, and then thing ID is so we can have a number. So this fetch is built into the browser. You may have to do what's called a polyfill for fetch if you have a really old browser, but we're not. And so those are called polyfills, things to say like, oh, this is Internet Explorer 10 or whatever, and I need X. So fetch basically takes the URL and then a object with method post, yada yada. You can go look all this up. You don't have to worry too much about it. Content type, and I'm not sending any data. And so this is a post with 0 data. And then the way this works is this fetch function starts the fetch, but then it delays it because it could take a long time to go across the internet, go through the server, and come back. And then what it does is it comes back and then calls this function when the response returns back to the browser. So this is the browser talking to the server, and then you split your code into 2 parts. The part that gets it started, and then the part that in effect asynchronously reacts to the finished. So that's why I'm saying log finished. So you see, oh, it finished. And then the next thing I do is I go grab those 2 little stars and I flip them. I hide them. If they're visible, I hide them. And if they're hidden, I make them visible. So unfavorite star thing ID, which means it comes back to this little guy here, and it just toggles them. So when I do this, it's actually hiding one and showing the other, hiding one and showing the other. I could have done this with differently, but that's really what's going on. And you can see the display none flipping back and forth down here as I flip it. And of course, it's also changing it in the server with the post request. So if I sit here and I look at the network, and I go unfavorite, favorite, unfavorite, favorite. And that's because as I'm showing it and hiding it, it's also toggling what happens when I click on it. If this is shown, then it's going to call unfavorite. Oh, this is now shown, it's going to call favorite. So the empty star is going to call favorite, and the filled in star is going to call unfavorite. Pretty cool, huh? I mean, you could probably come up with some better HTML, and so again, if you look at the console, this is quite nice. I got some debugging here, right? Favorite, favorite, finished. So that's actually going on here after the network shows when they start. Now that finished so fast, it's hardly whatever, but then this shows when it finished. Okay, and so that's how you debug this. Now you might have problems on your own code when you're doing stuff like this. Okay, but in this you just don't have to change much. So that is probably the hardest part of this. But then the last thing that we've got to do is we've got to go into the views.py and handle these posts to favs, thing, favorite, finished, right? So we got to hit the posts. So if you take a look at URLs, I'm probably going to need models. Keep models up. urls.py. So this is the routes. So it's really simple. Remember, this thing is the primary key of the thing ID, not the favorite ID. Favorite does have an ID, but we're not really using it. We're using the combination of the thing ID and the user ID, basically, as the index in the favorite. So we go find favorite view. It's down near the bottom. And so if you recall, most forms we require CSRF, and we could have put the CSRF in here, but it was a lot simpler to just make it CSRF exempt. You kind of have to decide on security whether or not it's okay. Like, I could write a code injection that would favorite a bunch of books for you. Is that really that dangerous? But you could make this more secure. But what I did is I made it CSRF exempt. Okay, and so if you go read to Stack Overflow, you have to import these things and then add this little thing that basically says, hey, we're not going to blow up CSRF. If you don't, these things will get 403s, I think, which is not allowed, but you don't want that. And then after that, this looks like pretty much any other thing. It's a login required mixin, which basically means a session has to be established. We're not really caring that we're just extending a normal view. It turns out there's no UI to this. If you look at the response is empty. But that's okay because the damage has been done in the server as a result of the post. So we got a post method we're overriding from view, and we're taking self and request, which we always get, and PK, of course, which is the second number, right? I guess it's in URLs, right? PK is whatever this second number is. It's that parameter. And we get PK as the parameter comeback views. There we are. Print some stuff out. I'm going to load the thing that corresponds to the PK or blow up with a 404, right? So you can't just guess. I can't just say, I can't, if I pick a PK that doesn't exist, nothing happens. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to load the old favorite. I'm going to create a new favorite, and I'm going to put to the left and the right the user value of favorite, right? So we're setting these two parameters right here. Setting thing and user. So thing is being set to the current thing we just loaded, which is got a primary key. And the user is the current logged in user. Now, we're going to save it, but we're going to do it in the try except block because what if there's already one there? And if you recall, you can't, because of unique together, you can't save the same combination of thing and user twice. And there's other ways I could have done this that are a little more complex, but I kept it simple. I just did a try and said it's okay if it blows up. That means it's already there. Because I don't let you really hit the favorite twice, but if you somehow could like click on this, if I could do an inspect element, and okay, and like so we're unfavorited. So, but I could unfavorite twice, right? All I'd have to do is somehow convince myself to grab this URL. It's not favorited, and you think, oh, don't do that. Well, the user can always like hand put this URL in. I just unfavorited it. What did I do wrong? Oh, too many favs. Come back. That's a second unfavorite. Well, I don't know why that blew up. Well, let's stop playing with that. Let's see. Did it complain in my thing? Thing one unfavorite. Favs thing. Oh, I know why. Duh. I'm doing a GET request. There is no GET request. Come back. Yeah, you can't always put it in a browser and make it work. Teach me a lesson, right? There's no def GET. And I can make it work, but that's a GET request. And so it's like, sorry, there ain't even a GET request here. Okay, so high level, we get the thing's primary key, we load the thing, we create a link, we create an object to put into fav with the two pieces, and we try to save it and don't really care if we've inadvertently double saved it because our UI is sort of keeping us from causing that to happen. Okay? So that's the favorite. The delete favorite is even easier. Right? So in delete favorite, we're CSRF exempt. We have to be logged in, because if you're not logged in, then request user is going to blow up. This line's going to blow up because request user is not necessarily set if you don't have login required. So that's why we drop login required mix in right here. And then we load up the old thing. And that's because we need to put it in this effect filter. So this is like a where clause in SQL. Fav objects get user equals the current logged in user, and thing equals T. T was the primary key of that thing. So if we can get it, then we delete it. Now, if again somebody manually found their way to the unfavorite button, even though we've hit it cleverly, they could still find their way, or a web browser might find its way. We're like, okay, we tried to delete it, it's not there, there's nothing bad, we'll just kind of fav not, it does not exist, and we're going to pass. And then we return an HTTP response, which is, in effect, emptiness. So when we come here, go to the network, refresh, clear everything, unclear it, right, there is nothing there. So we returned an HTTP response, but the most important thing is that we sent back a 200. So this, implicit when you're doing this is there is a 200 going back. And so it is successful. Okay, and so I think that this is pretty much all I have to cover on this, how to build a favorites. The quick way to test this is you should be able to turn these things on and off and watch the network tab, and then if you hit refresh, these two things, the state of these should be the same, meaning that you've properly recorded them in the database. So when I had it breaking, I would hide it, and then I would refresh it, and the little orange star would come back. So I hope this was helpful to you. A helpful little walkthrough going through the favorite sample code. Cheers.
Hello and welcome to another walkthrough for Django for Everybody. In this walkthrough, we're going to take a look at the sample code called well. The name well is based on a long time early pre-internet forum in Berkeley, California, and so you can go look up the well. So the basic idea of the well is it looks exactly like MyArts. It's pretty much a clone of MyArts. So if you recall MyArts, you had articles CRUD, article submit, article CRUD, delete, just a basic article CRUD, right? So the only difference between this and the well is there's a search box here. So I can search for things that have yada in them, and then I can clear the search box. And that's it. So first, let's observe something that we can observe from the outside. When I do a search, the search is a get parameter. And the reason for that is that we want this, get parameters are get URLs are idempotent. So that basically says go to my blog and find all the blog posts that mention 1, 2, 3. So I could put that in as clear my search here, and I could do let's search for DSS DSS search here. So that is, this URL is the search for the ones that are DSS. So now I've bookmarked both these, and now that is going to be a short link to the ones that say DSS. So what I'm going to do is clear this search now, and this will show you something about idempotent URLs. I'm going to say yada 456, I was here, submit. So now I have two that have the word yada in the title, but watch what happens when I go to the URL that I bookmark. So I see now two posts. So the key of idempotent is not that you get the exact same page, you get the exact same logical page, not the exact same text every time. It's not like a cache that just clones the text. I go to this before, and then I go to it now, and if I then delete this one, and then I go to this again, that's the ones that have yada in them. And so that's why we're going to do a search for yada. And it's really quite simple here. I'll show you everything, but let's just start with an inspect element so you can see what's going on here.
the first little trick here is you can construct that URL, and this goes way back. This goes way back to a form without a method equals post, which means it's a get method, which means that this name equals search becomes, it just goes on and it does a get request. So instead of doing a post request, which we've been doing for weeks now, this does a get request and it adds a get parameter. Okay, and so we've got in our view, our main view that is we're seeing a get parameter. It is not a different view. We're getting a view with a get parameter. And that also means that if I inspect element on this little undo icon that I made, inspect, all I'm doing is I'm making a link to /well without the parameter. So it's super easy. So like get rid of the search is just go to a different URL. I could have done it with, well, it is an anchor tag. It's an href tag. Look. So I've just gone to well and it's not there. It's the same view. So searching, and if you were to go and take a look at how Amazon or Google, they do search, they're forever putting that stuff in the URL so that you can then bookmark them. And so I'll get rid of those samples. I'll get rid of those bookmarks later. But you see how that is idempotent. That's the get. When I said weeks ago, I said get URLs are idempotent. I can now sort of show you in code that we're writing how that works. Okay, so let's take a look at our code. I'll clear my search here. The code here is pretty straightforward. We've got a really simple model that was pretty much taken straight from the MyArts code. This is like it's got a name. I called it post instead of articles because I've got all these applications running at the same time, so I have to change a few names here and there. Related name is when we're poking a lot of we're putting a lot of foreign keys into owner across my Django project. So you got to be careful to choose a name for related names so you don't end up with a collision. You can't just say owner or whatever. So I call this post owner so that you don't back in the owner model. Back in this model right here, the auth user model, we're pushing, in effect, methods or attributes into that model. And so we got to name them. And so this related name is really quite important to make sure across all of my applications. And what I mean is these are all applications in one giant Django project. So this name here wants to be, and lots of these applications are using owner. And they're making a foreign key into the auth model, which is perfectly okay. It's just you got to be careful about the related name. Okay, so that's why that's there. So let's take a look at the urls.py. The main URL that we're going to change is this one, right? It's the list view, and here it is in the list view. And I don't know which way to go first here. Let's compare and contrast this list view with the views in MyArts. So in MyArts, the list view, I could just borrow owner list view, which was like extended generic list view, and I just say my model's article, and it was good. But now I got to do a whole bunch more work here. So I actually am going to, and I might have been able to do this by sort of overriding a few methods like we have done in the past. But I just decided that I would simply write all the code. And so I'm just extending view here. So I'm only extending view to make post list view. I'm still following the pattern so I can say what the model is. I'm not sure I even use that. Let's see if I use model. Yeah, I don't even need that. Template. Am I using that? It was kind of, yeah, so I'm using the template name here. So I still am going to use the template name. But I didn't need the model because the reason I didn't need the model is I'm just explicitly using post in all the places. And so just get that so it's not, I mean, I don't like code that does nothing. It's always a mistake. Okay, so the get request. Most of this is in a get request. There is no post here because in the list view, which is this view, there is no post. This form is a get request. That's a get request. And all it does is we are going to do a GET request, and we're going to do 2 versions of that GET request. And we're going to have one version of the GET request based on whether there's a search GET parameter or not. So we're basically saying go grab a GET parameter, get the GET parameter using the GET method of a dictionary. The big uppercase GET is the dictionary, and lowercase GET is the name of the method in Python. Search is the key, and then default is false. If we get a string, then we've got to search and filter. But let's start with this. All we're doing here is we're grabbing the objects, and this is the kind of code that is done automatically in owner list view, which is then generic list view, right? So this is just, I'm just doing the code. Now the thing I get to do with this that's really nice is I can go through and augment this object list. Now, so this is a list of objects, and I'm going to change each object, and I'm going to add a field. Oops, undo, undo, undo. I don't know what I just did. Undo, undo, undo. Okay, that I want to keep. So this is an object. So objects is a list of objects, and I'm going to grab it, and I'm going to add a field. So you can sort of in the middle, you can add this natural-updated, and I'm going to base it on updated at, which is the long, ugly-looking date. It's a real date, but it's a long, ugly-looking date, and I'm going to run that through the natural time filter, which again is something built into Django that puts in this 15 hours ago thing, which is much nicer than just putting the date out. Okay, and so we're going to send the objects in this post list, which is the list of objects, and then we're going to send the string, the search value in, just so we can show that, so that when we want to see this yada, so you can actually change this, right? So we want to put this back in, right? So we're going to pass that into the template, and then we're going to render the template. Dump queries is code just to show the queries that are actually being run. If I was running this locally, so let's take a look at the code. So for most of this, literally, it's the same thing. Okay. So it's basically looping through. It's doing a little bit more tricky stuff here. If the text is less than 100, I'm putting it all in. And in the list, I'm only going to put, so if the post is length is less than 100, slice is 0.99. How come I can't see that? Yeah. Oh, that's because I'm not the owner. That's because I'm not the owner. Posted by DJ Free Samples. Who am I in this situation? Well, let's add a post. A title. Zap. 1, 2, 3. Submit. Yeah, so it's showing this detail. That's what I was confused about. See this little detail? Oops, not with that endif. That post text length greater than 100. So there's actually a bug in this code right here, and since I'm running it on samples, it'll take me a while to get it updated, but I'll just point out that there's a bug here and I want to fix it, because I really, this if post owner ID, that's our standard, like to show the edit and delete, and I inadvertently had this code that's showing the actual text. This is what I wanted to look like. I wanted a title and I wanted a short summary, so you'd have to go into here to get the whole summary, but the short summary of the text. So this code, when you run it again, you will see, after I update all this and push it through GitHub and run it in production, I will fix this, okay? And so that is what makes this, to keep that nice and short. 99 might be too long of a thing. I'd rather that stuck to one line, but whatever. Posted by the username in this case. There's the username, that's nice. And a URL into the post detail. So this is really straightforward stuff other than that little cool bit there of putting the summary in. But the only thing we really have added here is this form. And we are going to do a form. It's going to, because we haven't said action equals on the form tag, it is going to post right back to the same URL that it came to. I mean, not post, it's going to do a get because there's no method equals post here. It is going to get right back to this same URL, and I have the input with a placeholder. The placeholder is what gives me this little searchy bit thing. See that? It's not really the string search, it's a placeholder if it's empty. And then I have value equals, oh no, undo, value equals search here, which is taking the old search value. Ooh, zap was there. And so that's putting zap back in there. And of course it's escaping it. And so if we were, you know, there's no HTML entities problem here, or whatever. And I put this in an if, right? And that you don't have to put these on separate lines. You see me doing a lot of that where I'm having the if and end if on separate lines. But here I just have it like right in the middle of a line, and that just is going to emit that text in the middle of that line. I'm using a font awesome icon for the search so that I get this little search button. That's kind of cute. That's a thing called font awesome. You can go look that up. And then I have a link that goes back to well:all. I could probably call this like request.path or something, because it's really would be the same thing. Instead of URL well:all, I could just go back to the request path, which would be /well/, but it doesn't matter. Well:all is nice. And then I throw another font awesome in there, which gives me a little undo thing. And we've been using these little font awesome creatures for a while now. And so that's really all that is needed to get this new bit of user interface into the output. And so really the only thing left to show you is the code where it handles the search. So there is a filter. So post objects all order by, that's what happens if it's not searching. So what you see here is all we've done is instead of saying all, we say filter. And there's a couple of ways you can do filters. You can do like just if you're doing one field, this is a really funky syntax. It uses 2 underscores. Title is a field in models.py, right? Title is a field in models.py. Double underscore contains, that is like an operator, and then this is a string value, which is just a string here in our Python code. Now I want to actually search through both the title and the text. So I'm going to have to make myself a combined search. So I'm going to make a query. And I'm going to use this dbModelsQ, which means I can create a query in, and I could do it in a really long, yucky query there, but I'm going to start with a query that says the title contains the string, and then I'm going to add to that an OR clause. We're stuck in Python, right? It's not SQL. We're stuck in Python, so we got to have this funky thing. So this says these two things create a thing that basically says if the title contains that string, whatever it was, zap, if the title contains that string, or if the text contains that string, select it. And now instead of all, I put filter query, so I pull the query in, and then select related. This is an efficiency thing that says, look, I'm going to actually look at all the data. So run that whole filter, run the username, do a bunch of stuff. So I got a comment toward the bottom of this that talks about select related, and then the order by, and then show me just the first 10. That's the same. And there we go. And then we augment that, and then away we go. And so search is either, in this case, search is either the get request from the former get, is a zap value in this particular instance, or it is false. And then that triggers, of course, this bit of code in the template. So that's pretty much it. I mean, I certainly probably over-talked it. It's not that complex. And then so I want to show you only one more thing for this before we wrap it up, and that is a new pattern. So you'll notice if you look in here, there is only one view. There is just the post list view. And if we take a look at articles, we've got these views, the detail view, the create view, the update view, and the delete view. And they all extend owner create view and then just change these variables. I overwrote this list view because I had a whole bunch of other things I wanted to do that owner list view wasn't going to do for me, right? And so But you'll notice that in the well, I don't have those. So let me show you how these are, and you'll notice I have edit views, right? And I got them, they're still there. And there are templates. CD templates, well, the templates are there, okay? And as a matter of fact, in this one, I changed the default name of the templates because I'm kind of tired of putting underscores in front of certain things. But let me show you how I solved the problem of where are the views. They're actually fully in urls.py. So here is, so I import owner list view, owner detail view, owner create view, and owner update view. And so what I'm saying is map the post/int pk, which of course is the detail file, right? Post int pk. And I would like you to call owner detail view, which is a class that's come from myarts.owner, as view, and then you can put a series of key value pairs in that override the default values of, say, model and template name. And so I'm saying models equals models.post. I know that. That's the name of my model, right? And then template name equals, and now I'm even saving, I'm taking the app name, which happens to be sitting conveniently in a string here, and concatenating it to detail/html. And so that is the view, and of course name equals is just part of the URLs thing. And you'll notice that when I do the create view, I set the success URL, the model, the template, and now remember I want to hide some of the fields. I want to show which fields are there and which fields aren't, right? And so if we look at this views, you see like which fields you actually want to show, because I don't want to show the created at, etc., and the updated at, right? In the models, I don't want to put owner out, I don't want to put created at out, so I'm going to give a list. I'm going to give a list, come back. I'm going to give a list of the fields I want to show on my create form. So again, these are sort of class-wide variables that turn into object instance variables when it makes this view, and it overrides all these things. And so all the stuff that I was doing in views.py, I am now doing in urls.py and just reusing owner create view. And you see in update, delete, they're all kind of there, right? And so I don't actually need to put the views in. And this is really, it looks a little more complex, but I think it's a lot prettier than putting these silly views in over and over. So that's a pattern that you may want to use. It made it easier for me to rename from well to something else if I wanted to, because really well is only hard-coded one place in here, so that's kind of cool. Okay, so there's a couple of lessons here. You know, one is this searching, one is the search and how that works, but then also a new way to create views that never really leave urls.py. You could build, and remember, I built this owner detail view to meet my needs. So things like template view, that's something that is just a bunch of code somebody wrote. So, okay, well, I hope this walkthrough of the well sample application has been useful to you. Cheers.
Hello and welcome to a simple making of one of my lectures. So welcome to my home office studio. I've got a blog post on drchuck.com of all the stuff I bought to make this. You're in 360 so you can completely look around. I'm not going to move the camera. You'll see that I have a 3-light setup. Very important. They're LEDs. They're adjustable. Not very expensive, but the key thing is to manage the natural light and to match the LED lights with the natural light. So the window's kind of over here, and I've got it tamped down as much as I can. You'll see there's a little bit of shadow on this side of my face. I got a fill light over here that's cranked up as high as possible. I got a key light up there. Probably the most important thing of any light is diffusion. If you get lights close, they cause really harsh shadows and weird shapes, but then you can't control the light. And so I have a key light that's high so that I don't light the background, the walls and stuff behind me. I don't want to light the walls behind me. And so it keeps the light off, and so by keeping them close, then you can aim them down and get the area that's being lit to be relatively small. So like I got like at night, if I really wanted to, if I didn't turn my overhead lights on, well, I should probably turn my overhead lights on. That'll fix the lighting a little bit. That's what I was missing in my lighting before, is overhead lights. So I've got daylight balanced lights everywhere in here. I've got key light, backlight to halo my hair. And then I have just like a fill overhead light, and that helps balance out the, but that fill overhead light, if you look, those fill overhead lights are daylight balanced, so they're 5,000 Kelvin. So that's lighting. Lighting's important. So let's take a look at the camera setup. If you can't quite see it back there. Oh shoot, I gotta move it. Now you can kind of see it. You see that I got a Sony CX560, and it's just a camera that I have. You got to pick the right HD camera. You could probably do this with a Logitech 920 in there, but I've got a Prompter Pro teleprompter here. It's like a $700 teleprompter with the little screen down here that's auto reversing and 50/50 glass. You got to pick your camera. You got to pick your camera based on, does it like send its data signals out? And I've got a remote for it, which makes it easy because I can start and stop and play with the menu from over here. Always keep a cup of liquid. This is coffee. Look, it's coffee that's got code that is probably either C or Java or JavaScript. Because the more you talk, then your throat starts drying up and you gotta do whatever. So, so then I've got all these cables down here that you can kind of see where I can reroute everything. But I've also got like a Sennheiser, I think they're called like G600 or something, wireless. And I got that because now I'm wirelessly mic'd up. I've got a wireless in my pocket and I can walk in and out. And if I need to do a teleconference, I always use AirPods. Because I really want to walk around. I don't want to feel, I used to use a wired microphone, and I had an Audio Technica, which I really liked, but I just switched to wireless because I had them from my television production days. And so like it's wireless. I turn my phone on airplane mode because you do not want any distractions. I have a headset just to make sure that my audio is properly routing to the camera every time before I start. Now, right now, if you look at my camera, I've got it hooked up to the computer, but I also have the HDMI out. When I'm doing teleconferencing, I use a HDMI to USB converter so that I can stream HD video with all the lighting out of that camera. And so I've got, this is the HDMI out from the camera. And I'm going to unplug my laptop, and so you'll see that that little monitor is not at this point my computer, but instead it's now the video. And then I can frame the video up by moving it because I fiddle with it to show you the back. And so now I've got the video reframed up. I got a zoom. I can zoom in and out. I want it as close as I possibly can be so that it's easy to read the stuff on the teleprompter. I'm going to be making a Welcome to Django for Everybody video, and oh boy, who's bugging me? Some cat pictures from, let me get out of message. That's another thing, is turn notifications off, notifications off, because now I would be in the middle of making a lecture and I'll get a cat picture. It's the problem of being stay at home, is that everyone thinks it's time for a cat picture all the time. Okay, so back to this, right? So now I've got my camera properly set, and I've already tested my audio, and that's working. And then I can turn recording on with this when I want to do the actual lecture. And so now I'm going to disconnect. This is just a dual female connector. I'm going to disconnect the camera, and again, when I do that, I connect. I'm going to stream live with that camera. I just switch to this and then hook this into the computer, and that's just a standard USB 3 thing. That's a Meg. Well, I've had that for about 2 years. It's a fine little unit, warms up a little bit, but I can't complain. But most of the time I will just leave this little gender fixer in there, and then I'm going to plug. See, I got little marks on the blue, means that blue for that monitor. So this is the monitor, and so we're going to plug the monitor into the computer, which I've got it set up to mirror the display, just because I want to be able to look either way. I don't like typing over there. And so this is a really short lecture. This is just a welcome to Django for Everybody specialization that I'm preparing to put up on all the MOOC platforms. And so this is how I do short lectures. I use PowerPoint not as whatever, but as teleprompter. And so you'll see when I start recording this lecture that I'm just using PowerPoint black on white with teleprompter. I just turn it up to full blast, and now you can see what my teleprompter looks like. And I'm just reading my teleprompter slides, and you'll see I just sort of like, I wing it. That's just to make sure I talk about all the things that I want to talk about. I'm never going to show that slide. I'm going to edit the whole thing later in post in Final Cut Pro. I guess I could show you that too. What the heck, right? Okay. So I think I've got everything I need to tell you about how this works, and it's about time to sort of check my hair, check to make sure I don't have too many wrinkles or dandruff or anything, and take the glasses off because I can't see here without my glasses, but I can see there. And so what I like is really relaxed. I like the feeling that I got a cup of coffee here. It's relaxed. I got a wireless mic. The lights aren't too much. It's not too bad at all. And so then I can just kind of like in the middle start talking and recording and make a nice little lecture. Okay, so you can watch as I record this lecture. That'll probably be about 2 to 2.5 minutes. So I'm recording. I can see the little red dot through my teleprompter, through my two-way glass teleprompter, so I feel good that it's recording. I could check my audio one last time to just because I don't like doing things twice, and I can hear my audio. Hang that back up. I mean, part of that when you're doing a studio is you just want to get you right. You got to get your audio right. You want your levels right. You don't want to record things twice. There's nothing more frustrating than recording things twice. Well, this is only a 2-minute lecture, so I can record it twice. Okay, let's go. Hello and welcome to Django for Everybody. One of the things that I like to do at the beginning of each class is sort of say why. Why should you take this class? Why did I make this class? And in particular, why Django? There are some questions like, ooh, why not Flask? And I'll get to that. So I just want to take you back in time a little bit. 3 years ago, I was a happy professor. We were teaching Python for our beginning users in our data mining, and then I thought it was really important to learn a second language, and so I taught PHP for our web dev. I like PHP. It teaches you like how the web really works. I taught SQL, and I love that, and taught about all the good stuff. And then we taught JavaScript, jQuery, and JSON as well. And I had been building that class literally for 5 years. I had been building the graders for it, the stuff, and one of my metrics as a teacher is how far do my students get at the end of class. And so I look at 15 weeks and what was the last assignment, and then that to me is the way I judge whether or not I've done well or not. And over the years I try to get the students farther and farther, and I adjust the first part of the class to be more efficient so that I can be more effective at the end, and so I can put more useful stuff, because there's so much in the beginning classes that is just like, oh, the mechanics of it, and you got to learn the mechanics, and then you can apply those mechanics, but you just can't start off and say, here, cut and paste these 4,000 lines of code. It does you no good whatsoever. So 3 years ago I had a very well developed PHP class, and in not too many words, I was told that they didn't want me to teach PHP for web dev anymore because everybody wanted to do Python. And a lot of people were actually doing Flask in some of the more advanced classes, like our mobile application classes. So I was told to switch to Python, sort of told to switch to Flask. I I've done Ruby on Rails. I've done PHP, which is pretty raw. I've done Cake PHP, which is a framework. And I've done a lot of programming with and without frameworks. And another teacher taught a class using Flask, and I didn't like how that class turned out. I looked at the end of what they were doing at the very end, and I thought, whoa, that's not very much stuff. But I started with an open mind. And so I actually had a whole year when I was teaching PHP, for one whole year. They let me teach it for the last year. That's also when I developed web applications for everybody, www.wafree.org. And that's also become a MOOC as well, which I love, and I think a lot of people use it. They use it. It's really a great MOOC. And I'm still convinced that learning more than one language is a good idea. So you might want to take web applications for everybody after you take Django for everybody. So I would go everywhere I would go. I would ask everyone that I would meet, do you use Flask or Django? I mean, luckily, 5 years earlier, there was like 25 choices in Python. But by 3 years ago, it really narrowed down to Flask and Django. There's other cool ones like Sanic that are specialized. But Flask and Django are kind of like the big ones that everybody, not Web2Py, there were so many of them that I'm like, oh man, which one am I going to pick? And that's the problem with PHP frameworks, is there's so many of them. Although Symfony and PHP is kind of winning. So I would ask people, Django or Flask? And people would give me very passionate responses. They would say, Django is the greatest thing ever and Flask is absolute trash. I would go on to the next person. They would say, Django is trash and Flask is awesome. 50% of the time they would love one thing and hate the other one. It was amazing. I really got no trend whatsoever. And so about halfway through that, I'm like, I'm getting no data. I mean, I'm getting half the people love one thing and hate the other thing. And so I changed the question. I stopped asking whether it was Django or Flask. Because they were saying, what do you like? I was really asking, what do you like better, not what should I teach? And so I said, look, I can only teach one, Django and Flask, and which would you teach first? And then which would you teach second? What order? And then universally, everybody just had to accept the fact that Django was way better, way better to teach as the first class. And so I felt I got really strong data on that, so I picked Django. I wanted to use Django, and in retrospect, it's brilliant, right? I've been working on this Django class for 2.5 years now, and each semester I make it better. Each semester I improve the slides, and I do that thing where I try to compress the beginning and get efficiently done with the beginning part so that I can do better stuff at the end, and I'm really pleased. And so what you're seeing in this Django for Everybody's MOOC is that 2 years of careful engineering of the class. And I'm really proud. You can go to projects.djfree.com and see some of the things that the students have built. I'm amazed at how much they can actually build on their own. And literally, couldn't have done it with PHP, couldn't have done it with Django, couldn't have done it with Flask. Django is the only way that students would be able to produce complete functioning websites with a real user interface at the end of 15 weeks. And so that to me made Django a great success. And I wrote a Stack Overflow article, you might want to go find it, that talks about this, the whole process I went through in selecting Django and developing Django, which was a 3-year process. And I still think that you would be well served to take Django for Everybody first, but then go take web applications for everybody. Because you'll see two perspectives of web development in SQL. And there's certain things that are a little too magical and too easy in Django, and that's why we get so far in this class. Going back and learning sort of the basics, the more raw versions of what's going on, you, I think, will really appreciate web applications for everybody after you've taken Django for Everybody. I'll close with, I just got done looking at the most recent Python programmer community survey, and I was surprised to see that the number one use that they had of Python was web applications, and the number 2 use that they had was data applications, which floored me, because I know that Python is great for data applications and it's just super dominant. Part of the reason that it worked out that way is it wasn't like web was twice as much. Python is used for so many things, and so there was a lot of things on the list, and then web just edged out data analysis by a little tiny bit. So it might kind of been a bit of a false survey, but I think that going forward in the future,
using things like Django and Flask in Python will increasingly be very, very, very popular. And I also wrote another Stack Overflow article about how you can be critical of Python web development, and my answer is, if it's not perfect, it's going to be perfect, because people like to write in Python and they don't want to write in Rust or Elixir or Scala. Those are harder to learn, and honestly, whatever the shortcoming of Python web development, it's going to get fixed. So welcome to Django for everybody. I really enjoyed, and I've been looking forward to the moment where this was mature enough and well enough developed to become a MOOC, and so here we are, and I'm glad to make your acquaintance. Cheers. So one of the tricks, of course, is stare at the camera for a while so you can fade out. So let's just keep going. Let's just keep going. So I've got the camera done, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get out of this, get out of that, and I am going to take, if I get it right, somewhere in here, where is it? And I'll find it. Somewhere in here is, there it is. This is the USB cable, so I gotta put my glasses back on because I'm getting to work. So I'm gonna plug in my big monitor now, and so I'm gonna plug the computer in, the camera in, and hopefully that worked. How come it's not? USB connect. Okay, so that should mount the camera as a USB drive. Save that. Okay, so see, I still work in PHP. Goodbye. So let's start Final Cut Pro. Final Cut Pro, where are you hiding? Here's Final Cut Pro. So I use Final Cut Pro because I get data from so many different sources, right? So here I have a bunch of projects. This is the welcome project, and I've got this DJO, and then this is going to be a new one. So the first thing I got to do though is import the media. So I'm going to import the media from the camera, if all goes well. Clip number 1, 8 minutes and 30 seconds, took longer than I thought. So this will take about a minute to import. Now usually I let the import happen. That's going to take about a minute to import. Yeah, it's not doing too bad. Sorry. I'll make you watch. Normally I'd catch up on my email or watch a YouTube video while this was importing, but for now we'll just talk. Let's see, is there anything else to talk about? I don't think so. I don't think so. You can see my new hobby, which is car racing, and you see that I got a car racing chair, and you see at the end of a lot of my little videos a picture of me in my car. That's my new hobby, is racing cars in the shape of the Sakaiger. Where's their Sakaiger? Here's a Sakaiger. There we go, that's a Sakaiger. 56% imported. Here's a picture of my Sakai car. It's a Dodge Neon with the markings of the Sakaiger. He's got a little thing in his forehead. He's got eyes and nose. So there we go. Come on, import, 77%. What else can I show you? I went to Japan. They got a full-size Boeing 787, one of the first prototypes that's in a cool museum. That's cool. What else? We done yet? 94%. Oh, I just got so much stuff. Oh, look how old I am. I have a cool Y2K clock, and it's working. I don't know what it's counting down to. Okay, import's done. Import's done. Woo, let's start a new project. Come on. File, new project. So I don't like to fiddle around, so this will be DJOO. Naming convention is really important. OOY, Django. Naming conventions are important because you're going to do so much of this stuff. Okay, so I got Y Django. I'm open on the timeline. Just grab clip number 1 in. There we go. Yeah.
Hello and welcome.
Okay, so got to trim this off. Boop, trim. Trim. I didn't make any mistakes. If I'd have made a mistake, sometimes I make a clap or something, and it shows up in the timeline as like a blank area with clapping. That way I can remember. So.
Thank your acquaintance. Cheers.
So there we go. So we're done now. I've got another one open, so I gotta add like a title to this. Point. Add my name. Hey, Dr. Charles Severance, Dr. Chuck, University of Michigan, School of Information. Now I gotta put some sweet music on. This is music that I get that's copyright free off of YouTube. And it's so cool from these Jammy Jams guys. Oh, that's the wrong one. This music is by a group called E's Jammy Jams, and I kind of standardize on it. I pick a little bit of music for each of my classes and then use it over and over. I like a music outro because it lets students know that they've kind of finished, they're getting close to the end. So you'll notice that I just kind of bring in the music in sort of slow, and then I bring it in. So it just is a way to say, look, man, and you'll here's this pause. I'm sure I'm thinking deeply.
It's going to get fixed. So welcome to Django for everybody. I really enjoy.
Yeah. So you kind of see. That's just how I talk. So I'm gonna just put this music, and so I'm gonna bring this music in just a touch before I have that deep thought about the future of Django and the future of Python. So let's
on web development. It's going to get fixed.
Oh, I want that music coming in a little earlier.
Or Scala. Those are harder to learn, and honestly, whatever the shortcoming of Python web development, it's going to get fixed.
So you can see, you may not hear it on this, but it's sort of sneaking in there, and now everyone knows that I'm going to wrap it up. And so this gives them like a 10 to 15 second wrap up. And the E's Jammy Jams, this is a no copyright, no acknowledgement, but I'm an ironic guy, so I acknowledge them, because if they're going to give me beautiful free music and say I don't have to acknowledge it, then by golly, I am going to acknowledge it. So there's that. So then I have this. I got some more to do because I want to put some stuff up here. I want to put the PHP logo and the Django logo and the Flask logo while I'm talking about it. I got to put down here the URLs for Stack Overflow, and then I got to export it, and then I got to downsample it. So well, let's see. Let's do a couple things here. So one thing I want to do is I want to crop it a little bit. I always zoom the camera out a little bit, and this is one of the things I like about. I don't know if that's the one I want. I think cropping is what I want. Yeah. I tighten her up a little bit. Now I'm going to give myself a little bit of headspace over here. So I film at 1024 by 768 HD over there, and that gives me the ability, in case I move or something, I can adjust it so I don't zoom in too tight. I clean up where I'm going. Well, that's a bad look for me in post. Then I played enough with the audio that if you look at the audio here, you see it's sort of in the red. Some of you are smarter than me, but I always just take off 2 dB, and then I turn on noise removal. One of the nice things about these Sennheisers is I used to get hum. No matter what I did, I got hum. On wired mics, the wireless mics don't have hum. And so not only can I move around, but I also don't have hum. So I don't have to do hum removal. I used to have to do that on my wired mics. And again, this is why I like Final Cut Pro.
So many of them. Although Symfony and PHP is kind of winning. So I would ask people, Django or Flask.
So there I go. I wasn't making enough eye contact because I keep looking at you. So there we go. Now this is a simple one. My more complex ones, they have multiple layers, and if you look, I have layers that are sort of split screen with me and the slides and the scribbling. I have a scribble track, and then I have a full of me, and there's different layers. So these 3 layers here, they make up that. There's a black background, there's the slides, then there's me, and then I underneath it, and then I synchronize all these things because I record the screen with my Wacom and scribble on it, and then I synchronize them all, and then I play with audio. So if you look at this audio clip, it's got the -2 dB on it. I don't know why it doesn't.
So it sort of made the first one.
Doesn't have noise removal. It sounds okay. Oh, and that's the other thing I forgot to do. Big important thing is I learned about is you might not see it, but I am going to do modify balance color. And so what that does is it basically makes the color more like the real world. With this daylight balance light, the camera can sort of know what things are supposed to be like, what white's supposed to be, and so Final Cut has this really nice automatic balance, and that it looks amazingly good. This is me,
2
right?
years of careful engineering.
Yeah, it looks really good. So that's another trick, is always balance your color. And just do it on your video ones, and do I have noise removal on this one? Do I even need noise removal?
Look, I can only teach one, Django and Flask, and which would you teach first?
I don't need noise removal. So I prefer, if I can avoid it, not putting on noise and hum removal. So I'll stop there. I hope you found this useful. I have a blog post that talks about the inventory of all this stuff that I bought. The one thing you'll have trouble buying is this CX560 Sony camera. And you just need a good camera that has HDMI out and a nice microphone in. You probably don't need a $600 wireless mic, but man, I like it a lot. So, and I already had one from my previous video production days. So it's a nice setup. Thanks for watching. Cheers.